Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the City of Waterloo Council meeting Monday, June 27, 2022 at 2 p.m. Let's begin this meeting with a roll call, please, beginning with Ward 1.
Good afternoon, everyone. Councillor Hanmer present.
Councillor Bodley present.
Councillor Veith present.
Councillor Freeman present.
Councillor Bassick present.
Councillor Henry present.
Councillor Bonigo present.
And Mayor Jaworski is here. We would like to begin by acknowledging that the land on which we are gathered today is a land traditionally cared for by the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, and Neutral peoples. We also acknowledge the enduring presence and deep traditional knowledge and philosophies of the Indigenous people with whom we share this land today. Today, we also want to acknowledge Inuit people and the upcoming celebration of Nunavut Day on July 9th. Nunavut Day marks the passing of the Nunavut Land Claims Agreement Act in 1993. This act gave the Inuit of Nunavut self-government and acknowledgement of deep-rooted connection to the territory that, for generations, they have cared for and continue to occupy as stewards for future generations. Although Nunavut Day is celebrated primarily in the north, it is an opportunity for all Canadians to recognize and celebrate the distinct culture and heritage of Inuit people, as well as their many contributions to our society. While there is a lot to celebrate, we must also be mindful of the ways in which Inuit people have been uniquely affected by colonialism and how past harms affect individuals and communities today. Learning these truths are also an important part of reconciliation. As a city, we are mindful that our continued commitment to reconciliation must include Inuit people, especially Inuit people in our own community. As we look forward to July 9th, we stand with Inuit communities as they celebrate their heritage, culture, and self-government in Nunavut. A moment of reflection. At the beginning of this council meeting, we paused to think about the needs of our community. May we show wisdom and compassion in all our decisions. And I do have a council statement to make today. On June 4th and 10th, Waterloo Regional Police Service reported 2 hate-motivated graffiti incidents in the area of Allen Street East and Willow Street in Waterloo, and then in the University Avenue West and Ira Needles Boulevard area of Waterloo. We condemn these 2 despicable hate-motivated incidents and reaffirm our commitment to stamp out hate in this city. Waterloo values being a welcoming and loving community to all persons, inclusive of race, religion, abilities, age, sexual identity, and circumstances of birth. As a city, we will not tolerate any form of hate, racism, or anti-Semitism. We will continue to use internal resources and personnel, including park services, bylaw staff, and neighborhoods to address hate anywhere in Waterloo. We support communities that may be impacted by these behaviors. We will work with community partners to advance initiatives confronting hate. There is no place for hate here. Learn more about reporting hate incidents or discrimination involving Islamophobia, racism, or anti-immigrant sentiment at reportinghate.ca. And thank you to our friends at Coalition of Muslim Women for creating that site. I'd now like to ask Council for a disclosure of pecuniary interest and the general nature thereof. And I think I'll be looking to Councillor Freeman.
For you, Mayor Jaworski, thank you. I wasn't sure whether you wanted me to declare now or this evening, but I have Sorry?
Yeah, now would be good. That way it's over with for the start of the evening.
Okay. So I'm declaring with regard to the formal public meeting as it relates to 70 King Street related to my place of employment.
Thank you. I'll just pause to see if there's any further. I don't see any. So moving along, we move on to the consent agenda, which has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 items on it. And I'll just pause while council reflects on their notes on this item to see if anybody wants anything pulled for discussion. Hearing none, I have just one moment. Item C, I'll ask the clerk, since I'm sitting right beside her, if she wants to have questions now or to pull this item and vote on the rest.
You can vote on the rest.
Okay, so what we're going to do is we'll pull item C. So we're moving, one moment please. Councillor, I don't think micromobility is on here. No, it's under staff reports 10E, so that one's okay. So we're going to pull 9C, or 8C. So we're going to vote on the Gray Silo lease extension, Culture Sector COVID recovery grant, Sweet Gale Street traffic amendments, grant update report, delegation of authority to Director of Planning, Parkade agreement. And with that, I have a mover and a seconder, moved by Councillor, I forget who that is up here. Moved by Councillor Veith, seconded by Councillor Henry. I'll do the voting, beginning with Ward 1, please.
Councillor Hanmer in favor.
Councillor Bodley in favor.
Councillor Veith in favor.
Councillor Freeman in favor.
Councillor Vasic in favor.
Councillor Henry in favor.
Councillor Bonagor in favor.
And the mayor's in favor too. That carries unanimously. Thank you to the teams that worked on all these many different agreements. And it was great to see from our arts and culture team investments going into our arts and culture sector locally to help recover. I can't recall, but it looked to be about 10 or a dozen different investments. That is an awesome thing. What else do we have here? Lots of good stuff. Thank you all. We'll now revisit the items removed from the consent motion, which is C, and we'll just go to Councillor Bonagor for questions.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Jaworski. I just had a couple of questions regarding the proposed direction for some of the committees. I very much appreciate the fact that staff are looking for ways to make things more inclusive for people. I think that's a great direction. I just had a couple of questions. So I think one of the key challenges I've heard from people in terms of sitting on city committees has been some of the challenges when it comes to timing of the meetings. And I know that, flexibility, having some flexibility of timing can enable different people from different backgrounds to better participate. So I'm just wondering if staff, can we make it clear to current committee members that meeting times might need to shift slightly when new committee members are appointed?
Okay, one moment.
Thank you. Through the chair to Councillor Bonagor, certainly we can make that clearer during the process where we are reaching out to current members of committees to invite them to apply. And we can reinforce that as well at the time that the committees are struck so that it's clear that the times of the meetings can shift. And I'm speaking on behalf of Kevin, who is not able to be here this evening, but he did indicate to me that part of a review that's going to begin with the next term looking at committees will look specifically at matters such as this, the timing of committees and when they meet.
Oh, fantastic. Okay, thank you. My next question is just, the idea of an equity stipend. Again, I think it's laudable that you're trying to find ways to kind of balance the participation capacity for people. Just given the different workloads of different committees, I have a small concern that the equity stipend itself isn't super equitable. So I'm just wondering, as this rolls out, could staff kind of monitor the use and its uptake and keep a thought to whether varying rates might be warranted depending on workloads and committee expectations?
Through the chair to Councillor Bonagor, absolutely. This is really intended to be the first start, so it's really a pilot. at this point to determine the interest and whether or not this is sufficient. And as you mentioned, whether or not we should be looking at various committees to determine what the appropriate amount would be. So that is something that we would commit to taking away. Thank you.
That's fantastic. Thank you. I just have one more question as well. Like when you were looking at the council appointments and the committee numbers for different city committees, I'm just curious, why does WEDAC have 3 members of council? I don't see that anywhere else. And given we're an 8-member council, that comes strikingly close to half of us on the one committee. So I'm just wondering, as we move forward, and I know you're always reviewing committees, just wondering if it's possible to have a look at that and to consider whether 2 members of council might be more appropriate rather than 3. My reasoning is that I don't want to inadvertently give one committee more prominence over other issues such as sustainability and equity, which are equally, or they hold just as much weight and just as much importance for council.
Thank you. Through the chair to Councillor Bonagor, we do completely appreciate your concerns, and it is something that has been on our mind in the past as well. I believe that the history of it could have been from a significant amount of interest from members of council to sit on the committee and the number of subcommittees. But however, that being said, your point is well taken. Council could choose to adjust those numbers at the time that they make their appointments for the next term, or we would be happy to seek direction from council on that this afternoon.
That's all my questions. If either of them, the 3 people who do sit on the ECDEV committee, have any wish to weigh in on that, I'm happy to leave that for the next council to decide. Or if it's, I just wanted to flag that and put that out there. But thank you to the clerk for answering all my questions. That was great. Thank you.
Yeah, last one certainly is a good question. I think Councillor Veith has a commentary on it. Please go ahead.
Thank you through your mayor, and thanks for your comments, Councillor Bonagor. Councillor Bodley and I both sit on that committee. There's lots of stuff. I'm not saying that has more precedence than any of the other committees, but I certainly think that it's something that the next committee and council should probably take a look at, rather than this group right now just chopping a member off the committee. So anyway, that's just my thoughts on that, because certainly that can happen. We don't have to do that here, I think.
I think I too wondered that about 8 years ago, about why did all of a sudden one committee has 3. I certainly had an interest of it because of my background, and certainly others showed an interest. But I think it might be something that we can leave for, as a reminder to our next term of council, to consider appointing 2 members to it from council and see where it goes. Oh, I see Councillor Freeman's hand is up. Please go ahead.
Through you, Mayor Jaworski, just so we don't lose track of this conversation, is it possible for clerks just to flag that number in this particular document so that it does force some conversation by the next council?
Agreed. And the clerk is nodding yes, so that will happen. And it was a great question. That's one of those things that we've always done it this way, but why? So with that, I think you had sufficient answers to your questions to be able to probably move it as is, Councillor Bonagor. Awesome. So moved by Councillor Bonagor, seconded by Councillor Henry. I doubt there's any further questions. With that, I'll call the vote, beginning with Ward 1.
Councillor Hanmer in favor.
Councillor Bodley in favor.
Councillor Veith in favor.
Councillor Freeman in favor.
Councillor Vasic in favor.
Councillor Henry in favor.
Councillor Bonagor in favor.
Jaworski in favor. That's all of us. Thank you very much. It was a great discussion. Moving on to item, and thank you to clerk staff for putting that together. Next up, staff reports, item 10A, the Parkland strategy. And we have introductory remarks by our director, Jeff Silcox-Childs. Welcome, Jeff.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mayor. Good afternoon, everyone, and good afternoon, members of council and members of the public. Can everyone hear me okay before I start?
You sound good.
Excellent. I am very pleased to present to you today the city's Parkland strategy for your consideration and approval. This strategy has been developed over several years with a number of different staff involved, originally starting in IPPW with Karen and Barb, who I hope are both enjoying their retirements if they're listening to this, and more recently with Andrea Basler and her team in Parks, Forestry, and Cemetery Services. I would like to thank all of the staff from various divisions and departments and our collaborators who have participated in the development of this strategy, and especially our community members who took the time to read through what is not a small document, I will admit that, and provide their thoughtful comments. Your participation is greatly appreciated. Joining us today, we have Aha Naylor from our consulting team of Dillon Consulting Limited, who will walk us through a brief presentation. Following the presentation, Aha, Andrea, and I will be here to answer any questions. So without further delay, I will ask Aha to begin her presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. And I will ask just to have the slides changed, since that's not one of the things that I have access to. So next slide, please. So this process commenced some time ago. It was a pre-COVID work plan, so we obviously had a few hiccups along the way, but I think we've arrived at a very good place. It commenced with quite a full community consultation process. We had over 900 responses, and that engagement continued through the process throughout the process with a range of forums. And the second phase, which is the orange phase, many of you will remember, is the research assessment phase. It involved benchmarking with other similar cities, identifying best practices, and established a vision for the Parkland strategy. And it culminated with a report to council in 2019. And last year, we presented the draft Parkland strategy in 2021. And today we're presenting an overview of the refinements that reflect your input last year. And there was additional engagement on Engage Waterloo and with staff and with agencies. Next slide, please. The Parkland strategy re-envisioned the future of Waterloo's Parkland system for the next 10 to 15 years. It assesses the existing and future Parkland inventory against future needs, priorities, and the expectations of the community. And it explores new trends, directions, and strategies for investing in and animating parks throughout Waterloo. And of course, it aligns with the strategic plan priorities of inclusivity, equity, accessibility, sustainability, and Indigenous collaboration. Next slide, please. So these are some of the comments you made during our meeting on the draft report. You commended the team to find ways to address the needs of culturally diverse communities. You asked us to address equity in underserved neighborhoods, to keep youth top of mind, to ensure natural areas are part of the public spaces, to emphasize all season uses. Next slide, please. To consult with the GRCA because of the importance of the Grand River to the community, to include Indigenous initiatives programs, to emphasize the need for accessibility and accessible amenities, and to ensure there are provisions for a wide range of amenities in all 4 seasons. This isn't an exhaustive list, but this is the list that not only resonated with council, but was also echoed by the community and other agencies. Next slide, please. So following the council approval to release the document for public review, it was posted on Engage Waterloo, and we asked 4 questions to aid the discussion. Are there any opportunities that the strategy missed? Are there specific Parkland projects that should be prioritized? Do you agree with the recommendations? And please provide other thoughts or comments, a more open question. Next slide, please. So during the commenting period, Waterloo staff also met with key agencies and committees, and that included the Grand River Accessibility Advisory Committee, the Sustainability Advisory Committee, the Age-Friendly Waterloo Committee, and the 4 local school boards. Next slide, please. So what came of all of the discussions was a series of recommendations, and I'm going to provide just a very high-level review of the key takeaways, but certainly strengthening equity and inclusion and adding to the recommendations for those were some of the outcomes, and specifically addressing concerns around the distribution of parkland for higher density areas. There is a new recommendation identified for augmenting parkland provision targets to include both distance to parkland and per capita target provisions to reflect the surrounding community's needs. And a new recommendation to require the preparation of a parkland needs analysis when there is a sufficiently large parcel that's developed to make sure that the parkland needs of the new intensified neighborhood is met within the development process. Next slide, please. There were also a number of comments on public safety in parks, and the best practice that Waterloo practices is crime prevention through environmental design that's SEPDED. So the current actions of utilizing these principles is reinforced in the document as a way to move forward. And there's a second recommendation on increasing park frontages along public roads to improve natural surveillance and to ensure there are open sight lines into the parks. Next slide, please. There was also a recommendation around exemptions for parkland dedication, and specifically a new recommendation was added to address university or college lands that are not exclusively used for academic purposes, and that is to specifically examine and determine if those uses should continue to be exempt from parkland dedication. Next slide, please. Access to the Grand River was something that was received actually quite a lot of community feedback, and it highlighted the importance of the Grand River and access to it as a really significant part of the community, or one of the very important amenities in the community. So a recommendation was added to collaborate for Waterloo to collaborate with the Grand River Conservation Authority to secure waterfront property for public use and to enhance access to trails and water-based recreation. Next slide, please. There was also community feedback on the implementation of priorities, and this was based really on comments for the community wanting to see implementation priorities moved up. For example, more outdoor basketball courts and other features that engage youth. So the ask from the public is for more park amenities sooner than later. Next slide. And that concludes my presentation. We'd be happy to answer your questions. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Iha, for that. I'll just pause while we look for questions of hands to go up. But as we all know, very extensive look at the parkland within the city of Waterloo, and an amazing number of recommendations in here. I will look to Councillor Bonagor for the first set of questions. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Jaworski. I just have a couple of questions, a couple of comments. The first one is really talking about, the discussion about community gardens and about, small dog parks. Like I like to think of them as kind of pocket parks. Now, I know in the Uptown area in particular, we do have a few small public spaces that aren't marked that way. So a lot of people might not even know that they're public spaces. Just something like, the corner of Albert and Young Streets, little pockets of green space off the Spurline Trail, some very small lots on Dorset Street, that kind of thing. And I'm curious, when we ask people if they'd be interested in having a community garden or a small urban dog area, people might not even realize there's space near them that could accommodate it. So I'm just curious, is there already in existence a map, or could staff maybe have internally created a map of potential city-owned land that could accommodate a community garden or a small urban dog park, should the community know that it is available?
Through the chair to Councillor Bonagor. We don't currently have a map that shows potential community garden locations or small dog park locations. But yes, moving forward, staff can look at identifying currently unused spaces and sort of proactively initiating conversations with the community about what should happen with those spaces. Now, in the Uptown area, it's a little bit more complex, as some of these spaces are actually road right-of-ways and they're not parks. We do mow them, we do maintain them, but they're actually road right-of-ways. So we need to go through the process of discussion with transportation services to see if it is surplus lands in their in their for their departments, and whether or not they could actually be turned into a park. So, we will undertake that process as we reclassify our park system and sort of take inventory of what we actually have. And that will be sort of the first step after the park strategy gets approved.
Okay, no, that sounds like, who knows what it might unlock. That sounds quite exciting. My next question is about washrooms. As you know, like, we're all for public washrooms, and I think everyone over the last few years, if you weren't already aware of how important they are, everyone is now. So I know that other cities have had issues, like Toronto in particular. They've been having some issues in the timing of opening up their washrooms, and it largely seems to be linked to whether the washrooms are winterized or not. So I'm just wondering, as we do roll out our Parkland strategy and as we are building new washroom facilities, do we have a policy to make sure that the new ones are winterized, and going forward, potentially when opportunity arises, old ones could be retrofitted at some point in the future?
Through the chair to Councillor Bonagor, we don't have a policy for this, and I'm not sure that we need a policy to specifically address this. But the strategy does support for-season interest and use in parks. So from that perspective, this aligns. And with our newly proposed washrooms and the ones that we will be building in the future, the intent is to winterize them at construction, and that is the easiest way to do it, as opposed to retrofitting it. And with our existing washrooms, it will be more of a question of identifying a capital project specifically to retrofit, to set aside some funding. And either that, or the intent would be to do it at the next scheduled major renovation of
Okay, can you hear me now?
Facility. Oops, sorry.
I think just keep going. I think somebody's just doing a sound check.
Okay. Yeah, no, I just completed my answer. Is that good?
Okay, it's Councilor Bonagor is going to go away for a moment to reset her system, and in the meantime, I will go to Councilor Henry.
Thank you, Andrea and team for taking this one over the finish line, or at least towards the finish line. I guess it's our choice today as to whether it's over the finish line. Just before I get to the comment I had, I wanted to pick up on a couple of things that Councillor Bonagor had said, just to sort of flag them. I'm glad to hear that part of the park reclassification is going to be engaging transportation on road rights of ways. Certainly, when I started on council 12 years ago, there was a live issue around, Veterans Green and how, a substantial portion of that is in the road right of way. We haven't cleaned that up yet. I mean, it's not going away as a park, but that's one on that's always been on my list to make sure it gets cleaned up. So I'm glad there's a process. In terms of washrooms and retrofit, my hope is that parks can work with our friends over in recreation, where we have facilities that are run by a different division somewhere nearby to be able to think about access. I think my mind turns to Moses Springer as an area where we have a enclosed winterized sort of facility that has certain amenities, but they're not really accessible unless something's going on at Moses Springer arena, notwithstanding that there are things that go on around and outside Moses Springer is just one example. So I hope that there are some conversations that are going to happen as part of this process between parks and recreation as we try to optimize our amenity build out. The comment I had at the beginning was reflected in the presentation was just to thank staff and the consulting team for really engaging on the concerns and questions I had around, equitable access and distribution of parks. I think the way that this is being handled, adding, not just geographic distances, but per capita rates, helps to address some of those concerns, because there is an intersection of poverty, density, and the existing gaps in our distribution of parks, and so adding those as standards can help guide the capital prioritization process of where we go first when we're trying to augment these parks, fill in the gaps, and make sure that we've got enough space. Because it's not just distance as we grow up rather than out. We get a lot more people in smaller spaces, and so you might be close enough to a park, but the park's not big enough. So I appreciate that staff have made some adjustments to those, and I wanted to specifically take time out to commend you for that work. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Henry, and I'm going to go back to Councillor Bonagor now.
Thank you, Mayor. Sorry about that glitch before. My sound just dropped out. I just had two quick comments to pass on. And first of all, for everyone who's been working so hard on this strategy, it's been a long time coming, but I love the explicit inclusion of shade throughout the parks plan. This is a fantastic direction to see, and it's only going to get more essential as climate change intensifies. We're starting to experience unusual heat before the canopy has fully grown in. And tree shade is limited at the hottest parts of the day when the sun is directly overhead. So I love the fact that you seem to be layering this in for the future and looking at both natural canopy and structured shade. So I just wanted to give props and thanks to staff for kind of really digging into that issue. And the other small comment is that when it comes to the question of Wi-Fi and public parks, I personally would be leery of the sponsorship, the idea that was raised in the strategy, just because it might muddy the waters when it comes to privacy. That's all. But apart from that, awesome work. Thanks for all the efforts, and I think it's going in such a great direction. I'm very excited. Thank you.
And I'll just pause for a moment to see if any other hands go up, but in the meantime, I'll look for a mover and a seconder for this as printed. Okay. We have an amendment. And so I'm going to go to Councillor Vasic to propose that amendment and see where we go from there.
Thanks so much. I also want to provide comment that this strategy is such a wonderful document, and I'm so excited to see it come to life. And I also appreciate all of the work that's gone into this by staff, consultants, and everyone who's provided comments. So overall, I love this document. I am going to request one amendment that you see up here on the screen. I've worked with staff on this amendment, and the one piece that I would really happy to second. Oh, thanks, Councillor Heinmer. The one thing I'd really like to see in it is that we refer to the city-run Park Ambassador program as police-free, and I've drafted up some comments here just so that I make sure that I get across why that's important. So I'm just going to read them, and I'm really happy to respond to questions, and I think staff's available to respond to questions as well, and look forward to the debate on my thoughts around this. So as proposed, recommendation 14 of the strategy and the preamble just before it in section 2.2.5 suggests collaborating with police for the purposes of creating safe park design. The rest of the strategy doesn't justify partnering with the police, and in some cases, this idea works against parts of the Parkland strategy, especially, but not only, section 2.1.2, which names reallocation and upstreaming as an essential part of the city's anti-racism work, as well as section 2.2.5, which talks about safe park design and CEPTED principles, which the city already employs and no longer involves the police. Public parks are places where everyone should feel safe and comfortable to go. Yet we know that police presence can make people feel uncomfortable and unsafe in parks, particularly our racialized neighbors, those experiencing poverty, and youth. One recent study out of Chicago demonstrates that in neighborhoods in the process of being gentrified, white people call for police when they see unwanted behaviors, such as graffiti, in order to gain control of the space. That's a quote. Which led youth in that study to either avoid the space altogether or use it when there weren't many people there. Not exactly what we want for belonging. We also know that in a recent study of the Toronto Police Service, findings demonstrated that Black people are disproportionately subject to the use of force, strip searching, and other enforcement activities by police. The proposed alternative, a Parks Ambassador program as an upstream initiative without police involvement in its leadership or operations, would better create a sense of safety for all neighbors. In this recommendation, I'm not advocating that the city have a say in police operations. This is about looking in-house, as the Parkland strategy is asking us to do, and guiding our city programs in the way that aligns with what's in the rest of the Parkland strategy, as well as with our vision and commitment to community safety in ways that create less punitive and more compassionate and healing approaches to safety. My recommendation is also not about excluding police from police operation or emergency operations, but police don't need to be part of preventative upstream programs. In fact, they ought not to be. The sometimes adverse impacts of the presence of uniformed enforcement and that commitment to looking in-house is also why I've proposed a review of the city's Bicycle and Parks Patrol program to understand its role, effectiveness, and outcomes. One question you might have is it not enough to have city-led in the recommendation? Why do we need to add the term police-free? Well, without being explicit, we leave open the possibility that in future, the program doesn't meet the intended vision of being police-free. It also draws a line in the sand that at this point in history, with all the knowledge we have about the disproportionately negative impact policing can have on equity and sovereignty-seeking groups, as well as the favorable impact of upstream initiatives, we are willing to promote a vision where everyone feels like they belong and are safe in our parks, and in which we are not willing to expose equity and sovereignty-seeking groups to further trauma, fear, or put them on a path of criminalization. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. And I do see that, I think we'll just go with this as the motion and not as an amendment. We'll just go with this as the motion because I already see that Councillor Hanmer is ready to second it. I think this is a very reasonable adaptation to the entire park strategy, which is extensive, and a little fine tuning is good. Councillor Henry has a question of staff. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Vasic, for basically answering the questions I was going to have for you in your comments. So I won't have any there. One question for staff, since I didn't really dig into this area and this aspect in great detail. Can you give me a sense of what our expectations are for a park ambassador program, if we have a sense of what we want it to do, and how this sort of direction feeds into staff's existing plans or rationale or exploration? I just want to understand this in context, because I hadn't given much thought before this motion to what exactly a park ambassador program was intended to do and what it will do and how it's going to roll out. And it's now much more pertinent with the specific direction that we see before us.
I'm happy to jump into there. Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Henry. I think it might be worthwhile for me to step back and review the goal of recommendation number 14 specifically, which is that creation of that city-run park ambassador program. And the intent of the program is to provide information, education, and it's really about relationship building with our parks users. And starting to build strong, meaningful relationships in the field that we can then develop and take from there. And by definition, I would say a successful park ambassador program is going to be a non-uniform model with specific staff training in de-escalation as well as a trauma-informed approach. So I think the wording either way will allow us to achieve the goal of creating this program. Thank you.
Thanks, that's helpful, Jeff.
Thank you. And Councillor Bonagor, please go ahead.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Jaworski. Jeff, just on that question there about the non-uniformed element. Now, I know that some of our city parks, we have contracted security officers who kind of do some of those patrols for us. Like, how would that practice fit into this broader goal? Are you able to kind of comment on that at the moment, or is it a bit too early?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor, I'm happy to provide some comment. What I envision, or what the team envisions, is that there would hopefully be less reliance on uniformed patrols once we have a park ambassador program up and running. So that's really the goal. And again, a successful park ambassador program is going to be a non-uniformed program. It's really about connecting with people. And for many people, that uniform is a barrier to communication, and it is a barrier to creating really good relationships. Thank you.
Yes, no, that's great to hear. And I have heard from people who have been in Waterloo Park and have been surprised and uncomfortable when they've been, they've come across people who look like police telling them to move along. So I appreciate the thought that's gone into this. One note, though, is I think when communicating this, I just would really want people to know that they can still call police for help in an emergency in a city park. So I'll just sort of put that thought out there and leave it with parks and communications. Just, as this rolls out, I would just really want people to know that in an emergency, you can still call police if you need the help. Thank you.
Absolutely, for sure. Next up, I have Councillor Rees. Please go ahead.
Through you, Mayor Jaworski, and thank you for this amazing report. Just a couple things about the park ambassador. So the parks in my neighborhood, I don't think I've ever seen uniformed security or police. So I'm wondering how, like, if as an ambassadors, that I see that as community folks. Like in in my ward, we've got neighborhood associations and that are very active in our parks, and I'll tell you, they know what's going on in our parks. So I see them already in a way as ambassadors because they, you know, they protect the park. They, you know, they call out bad activity or unsanctioned or unwanted activity publicly. And so I was like, I just I don't understand how an ambassador program would work. We wouldn't have a staff person assigned to every park in the city, or would it be an ambassador? I don't know, the ambassador would be a staff person. I see that as a great role for community members to take on. So just a little clarification on that would be great. Thanks.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor. Great question. And we haven't landed on exactly what the program will look like. We anticipate that there will very likely be a volunteer component to it. So there would be city staff involved. Would there be city staff like one per park? No, I wish, but realistically, no, that's not going to happen. And I do definitely see a role for volunteers. We really want to engage our regular park users, the ones who are out there every day and walking their dogs or going for a walk themselves, and really seeing things that are amiss or things that just don't look right. And they are an excellent resource for a program such as this. So I kind of anticipate that it would be sort of a hybrid program with a volunteer component to it. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.
Excellent. I see no further questions. We have a motion that's properly moved and seconded, so I'm going to call for the vote, beginning with Ward 1.
Councillor Hanmer in favor.
Councillor Bodley in favor.
Councillor Veith in favor.
Councillor Freeman in favor.
Councillor Vasic in favor. Thanks all.
Councillor Henry in favor.
Councillor Bonagor in favor.
And Mayor Jaworski enthusiastically in favor of both the amendment and the entire park strategy. So well done, team, and thank you very much for that, and all the best in the implementation of it. Moving on to item B, the 2021 Consolidated Financial Statements. We have introductory remarks from Paul Hatinga, and KPMG standing by for any hard questions.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Actually, KPMG isn't with us today. The city staff and the city's auditors, KPMG, presented the audited statements to the audit committee on June 2nd, and the committee passed a motion recommending council approve these statements. In spite of the impacts of the pandemic on the revenues of the city, the financial statement presented an improvement in overall financial position over the prior year. The report before council details many other areas of improvement, such as debt and infrastructure investment. Once approved, these statements will be available on the city's website. I would like to thank the many city staff across all departments involved in this annual process, and I'm happy to answer any further questions council may have at this time.
Excellent. Thank you, Paul. I'll just pause for a moment while I'll see if any hands go up. Not seeing any questions at this time, and I'll turn over to our financing person, Councillor Henry, to move with a brief comment, and I'll look for a second in the meantime.
Thank you. As you know, I'm happy to move this one. I just wanted to echo Paul's thanks to the team and to our auditors for their hard work, and to our volunteers on the audit committee who looked into this. It is, as always, for the city, a clean audit with some small areas for review and improvement, which is always helpful. And 2021, despite all of the headwinds that we faced, and thanks to our senior government partners, turned out to be an okay year, and we are in put us in good financial position to continue advancing the public's priorities here at the city. So I wanted to thank Paul, through him, to his team, and to our auditors for the hard work on bringing these statements forward, and for the clean audit.
Excellent. Thank you, Councillor Henry. So we have it moved by Councillor Henry, and I need a seconder. Second by Councillor Bodley. We'll do the vote, beginning with Ward 1, please.
Councillor Hanmer in favor.
Councillor Bodley in favor.
Councillor Veith in favor.
Councillor Freeman in favor.
Councillor Vathek in favor.
Councillor Henry in favor.
Councillor Bonagor in favor.
Mayor Jaworski in favor. That carries. Thank you very much, Paul, and thank you to the entire team of Mr. Anderson of getting such financial statements consolidated. Thank you. West number C, West Side Employment Land Branding, Generation Park, Waterloo. We have a presentation by Kristen Sainsbury and Justin McFadden. So welcome.
All right, thank you. I think I'll kick things off, and then we'll hand over to Kristen. So just a quick little background on kind of where we're going. We can jump to the next slide. A little bit of background, starting back a few years. As everyone knows, we've been hard at work on the West Side Employment Lands for a number of years now, starting with a lot of hard work by Sandy Little, and then transitioning over time. And a lot of the infrastructure has been built out. We've taken a plan of subdivision, an OPA, and some zoning bylaw amendments forward. And this park is now, from a build-out perspective, pretty much ready for sale with servicing. So really, we wanted to sort of take things to the next level on the sales and marketing front, which sort of took us into the process that we're talking about today, which is on the branding front. So maybe we'll jump to the next slide. Quick little summary on location. I'm sure everybody knows where it is, but it is certainly far on the west side, adjacent to the Wilmot line. You can see us there, adjacent to the Costco. It's about 100 acres of employment land that is certainly much needed and in very short supply at the City of Waterloo. So we really wanted to take the time to do this right, and the marketing and branding piece was a big part of ensuring that we take this park forward with the goals of the city in mind, and get the right messaging out to the folks that we're targeting to eventually occupy the park. Next slide, please. So in terms of process, we did work with a great consultant, Sherpa Marketing. I suspect a few of the councillors at least had an opportunity to meet with them and provide feedback, along with a number of other groups that we consulted with on this process. One of the themes that consistently emerged was around sustainable design and development, not just as a goal of the city, but certainly as a potential opportunity and a way to sort of set ourselves apart and be unique in this space. So certainly a lot of engagement that was done as we worked to build out this brand. Next slide, please. And in terms of the goals and objectives of the strategy process, we were really just looking at opportunities for differentiation here. We wanted to build a brand name and a tagline, that kind of took into account the goals of the city, as well as the target market for where we're taking this. So that's really led us to kind of where we are today. So with that, we'll jump to the next slide, and I will hand it to Kristen to bring the rest of this home.
Thanks, Justin. Can everyone hear me okay? We received quite a bit of input. Yep, great, thanks. We received quite a bit of input through consultation with the groups that were identified on the previous slide. And the goal of the consultation was really to look at what makes the city unique, how we're positioned as a city to attract investment, and how this particular park is positioned within a bigger provincial and even federal market of companies, industries that may be looking at Canada, Ontario, or this region as a location to open their business or move their business. So the input we received through consultation, we did hear very consistent input along the way from the various groups. And the key themes that came out were making sure that we build upon the existing strengths of Waterloo as a leader in innovation and intellectual capital and world-class talent, making sure that we can leverage the position of the park in proximity to amenities such as the shopping and residential and open space, which it makes this park somewhat unique, you know, compared to other industrial parks that are often, you know, not connected to community. To capitalize on the opportunity in the market currently for industrial land, there isn't a lot of land. We're seeing that demand right now is surpassing supply. So this does provide the city with a good opportunity right now. And promoting the differentiating factors and emphasizing the sustainability focus of the park. As council's aware, staff are working on sustainability guidelines that will be brought forward in the fall to council. And that is an important consideration and part of building out this brand. And using these to position the park to attract the type of companies that have the vision and culture and the mandate to lead in the areas that we're looking for. Next slide, please. And so the big reveal, brand name tagline that was selected based on the consultation and with input on a number of options. Next slide is Generation Park Waterloo, and the tagline being next generation business for generations to come. So the tagline and name were chosen to reflect largely the sustainability principles of the park and the fact that council is looking generations ahead with their leadership in terms of the sustainability guidelines that staff are working on. Also, we anticipate, like there's a double play on the word here, where we may see solar generation and other energy generation coming and being used within the park. And so that reflects that as well. Next slide, please. And so just to kind of sum everything up, I do want to go over the brand positioning statement. This statement is really an important part of the whole brand positioning. It helps us communicate who we would like to see as companies in the park. It gives anyone looking at the park an idea of who the city would like to see there. And so the positioning statement is that we're thinking a generation ahead, and so are you. We've established employment lands in the ideal Waterloo location for the purpose of creating a community of businesses with their eyes on the future. You're a business focused on the next generation of products and services, but also on a commitment to our shared planet and future generations that depend on it. You embrace technology, innovation, and creativity as a means to establish market leadership, but you've also adopted leadership practices to establish a culture and mandate rooted in responsibility and positive impact. These beliefs attract a generation of sharp minds who are forward-thinking, just like the kind of people that call Waterloo home. Our West Side employment lands are surrounded by green space, new residential communities, vast and diverse retail and provincially protected farmland and forest. You can access and attract the best and the brightest. And with our environmental principles in place, we'll together incubate a community of businesses and people with corporate transformation at their core and well-being of future generations in their spirit. Generation Park Waterloo, next generation business for generations to come. So together, the branding, the logo, this brand positioning statement and messaging are really intended to communicate the type of companies that we want to see located in the park. And this is going to live on past the point that the city no longer owns the land. Thinking 10 years down the road, maybe sooner, you know, the city will have sold out most of the parcels with the exception of the dog park. And it'll be a way for both the companies that are there to identify with the area and the feeling of the area and what's been built, and also to communicate this vision in the long term for the type of companies that we hope to see in this area. And so for the final slide, our recommendations would be that council approve the staff report and approve the name of the park as Generation Park Waterloo, and that the branding guidelines that were attached to the report will be used in helping to guide and build out any future marketing on the designated lands. And so if there's any questions, Justin and I'd be happy to take those.
Excellent, Kristen. Thank you very much. No, I think job well done on the branding and the commentary surrounding it. I think that's exactly what kind of thing we're looking for. I'll just pause to see if there's any questions or commentary. And I will turn over to Councillor Bodley first. Please go ahead.
Thank you, through Mayor Jaworski. I love the branding, love everything about the brand position statement. Really excited to see the project continuing forward, and thank everybody for their work on it. The question that I have is one more of curiosity. Does staff envision that there will be sort of broader marketing of the park beyond to the development community, i.e. will there be signage that sort of will guide, you know, pedestrians and folks visiting the dog park and the surrounding areas, referencing this parcel as Gen Park or Generation Park, or is this intended to be more focused on the sale of the parcels?
Through you, Mayor, maybe I can jump in, and Kristen, if you want to add anything. Yes, no, the intention would be that there would be visible signage on site. You know, we have to work through some of that. We're actually going to work with our arts and culture team on kind of an entrance to the park, an entrance feature, leveraging some of the older assets that were left behind from farming days and what have you, to kind of build something as an entrance feature. But we do expect to see, you know, Generation Park signage and branding visible on the site as you would enter it. Certainly envisioned from a driving perspective, but that's good feedback in terms of entering it on foot as well.
And I'll perhaps just add that it'll also be digital marketing. We'll have a landing page that will be active for the time that we are selling the site, that will, you know, be able to update what properties or lots are still available in the park, what have you. And so combined, yeah, community vision for it, as well as direct marketing to people, developers, and even, you know, informing our business community that may be looking for places to expand, but they're already in the region.
That's awesome. Thank you for that. Really exciting, and yeah, really curious to see the next steps. And I'm happy you said that, Justin, about sort of how it may be integrated into public art installations that will be in the site, or some of the heritage pieces that you referenced. So super exciting. Thanks very much. Great job, guys.
Now over to Councillor Hanmer.
Thank you very much, Mayor. Through you, Councillor Bodley did ask the questions I was going to ask, so I won't repeat those. But I too am equally excited about the branding, everything that's come up about it. It looks great. Generation Park, Waterloo. It's exciting. It's simple. It looks to the future, and I think will help bring a lot to our West End. So great job for everyone. I just had one other slight comment, and it could be more my tired eyes than anything else. I really had a hard time reading the slide with the branding statement on it. Just the color combination and the font size was a little rough. I love the statement. It was great. Thank you for reading it out. That helped, but just I'll put that in the back of your minds when you're putting things forward for social media and on our websites. But great job. I'm excited to see what comes next.
Excellent. Thank you, Councillor Hanmer. I don't see any further questions, but perhaps some West Siders would want to move this. Moved by Councillor Bodley, seconded by Councillor Hanmer. Let's do the vote, beginning with Ward 1, please.
Councillor Hanmer, in favor.
Councillor Bodley, in favor.
Councillor Veith, in favor.
Councillor Freeman, in favor.
Councillor Vasek, in favor.
Councillor Henry, in favor.
Councillor Bonagor, in favor. It looks great.
I'm in favor too. It does look great, Councillor Bonagor. And with that, thank you, team. Thank you, Kristen, for all your hard work on bringing this to fruition, and Justin as well. With that, we move along to item D. And it's Northdale on-street parking. It's a report prepared for us by Christine Tetman and Chris Mulhern. And I do know Councillor Henry has some, well, let's see. First, to see if anybody has any questions. I'll just pause for that, but there is an amended motion to come forward. And we can ask questions after that as well. I don't see any questions at this time, so I'll invite Councillor Henry to position the amended motion. Thank you. And to highlight differences, that way it'll be easier for us to comprehend.
Thank you, Mayor. I think that the version I'd sent in had done the highlighting for me, but that's fine. Oh, there we go. It's coming back. It's amazing to watch the screen change in front of you sometimes. And am I doing something? No, that's staff. That's good. Okay.
This is great work by staff. Thank you.
Yeah. So red strike through is deletions and blue underlined is additions. So I'd like to advance this this alternative motion today. I want to thank staff for the work done through this process to seek out further public input in addition to the pre-consultation work that I had led before bringing direction to staff in the fall and through council. And I want to flag that the responses that we received through that process, which are more limited than I think we would have liked, despite numerous efforts to reach out to area stakeholders, indicated that there are clear demands for out-of-neighborhood visitors and out-of-town university commuters to use on-street parking, not occasionally, but regularly. And in conversations I've had since the report came out with municipal enforcement staff, I know that violations of the current parking rules are commonplace, both in the daytime and overnight. And they continue despite regular enforcement from staff. Now, in no other Waterloo neighborhood would this kind of flagrant violations and out of neighborhood, out of towners and their regular use be tolerated. And it should not be tolerated in this one either, especially since this community here in Northdale set a vision to create a vibrant, sustainable neighborhood centered around people rather than around cars. In looking at all other mid-sized cities in Ontario with universities, they have generally banned weekday on-street parking in response to these same kind of pressures, with some minor variations in approaches. Paid on-street parking, which I am proposing and have proposed that we recognize as the end state here, is taking a different approach. It recognizes this is a different kind of neighborhood with different kinds of needs and pressures. It creates space for infrequent visitors and makes sure regular visitors contribute to more fully achieving the vision of the neighborhood, one that's built around people instead of around cars. In the short term, as recommended by staff, I agree that we should take the first steps in this transformation and support enforcement by making clear where you can park your car. That's the line striping here. And we can also better manage the high demand for the curbside by designating short-term loading areas for deliveries and pickups. Staff did engage with Uber and others, and there are challenges given the volume of parking in this neighborhood with facilitating pickup and drop-off. But in the medium term, I think we need to set a broader direction around where this is going rather than just standing pat. In the medium term, I believe staff need to take another look at the appropriate mix of technologies that will provide equitable access to paid parking and bring that information in a more detailed financial plan forward to the next council for their consideration. I would note there has been some incremental feedback received through this process that council didn't have before it, that I didn't have and staff didn't have before we started this process, and that's been beneficial. One of which was on the question of whether an app-only paid parking approach would be consistent with concerns around equity. And there have been concerns raised about that, and so more time is needed to figure out if there are alternatives, and if not, to properly budget and plan for how to roll out some more traditional hybrid approaches to this in terms of both traditional machines and app-based payment. And I think that needs some more time to work through, and staff need more time than this council has left to be able to look into those things and bring them back to council for consideration. And the other one, and this is the last point I have on the recommendation slides that was raised by some of the stakeholders in the area, is that with the loss of Greyhound in particular, that we no longer have robust intercity public transportation options for folks that are coming in and commuting. Now, these folks should be accommodated by the places they are visiting, but this is a recognized barrier to doing this in a way that is car-free rather than needing to drive in. And so, the region received delegations on this sort of request for advancing intercity. There's an intercity alliance for transportation options, and the region agreed with that and wanted to bring that forward because it's provincial jurisdiction to provide intercity transit. That we do need to be able to regularly get between here and Guelph, between here and Brantford, between here and Hamilton. We need to be a more connected area so you don't just have to drive everywhere. And things have gotten worse, not better, over the last few years. And so I recommend that Council endorse and join the chorus of that advocacy to the province, because those robust intercity public transportation options are critical. Go Transit and two-way go is helpful, but that only goes to a few destinations, and it can be a little bit painful. I know certainly my wife experienced the pain of that when regularly commuting between here and York University in Toronto over two different go buses from early in the morning. It can be painful, and there are better ways, I think, to be able to do that. And certainly, it shouldn't take as long to get to Guelph by bus as it does to get to York University, and that's about what it is now. So more work needs to be done by the province to help recognize and counter those very valid concerns that we did hear through this process. So with that, I hope I have a seconder for advancing this alternative recommendation. I'd be happy to answer any questions that Council has. I'm certainly interested to hear any responses from staff to any questions Council may have.
Excellent, thank you. Yes, during my first term as mayor in Southern Ontario, mayors and wardens were behind an initiative to position to the provincial government for better inter-community travel. It's certainly an issue in our rural environments, a key issue in our rural environments, people trying to get anywhere. And just for those listening in, inter-community travel is the realm of the province, not of individual municipalities. So certainly something that is well taken for our commuter crowd that we have here. I do see Councillor Bonagor is willing to second it and has some comments, and then we can get into questions from Councillor Vasic. Please go ahead.
Thank you, through you, Mayor Jaworski. Yes, I'm happy to second the amended motion from Councillor Henry. A couple of reasons for it. I see it, if free city parking is being viewed as the alternate to paid private parking, that I don't see this as a question of equity in essence. It's about people wanting something for free that the market clearly shows is worth money. In the amended motion here, there's still a lot of room for flexibility in terms of assessing paid parking hours and free parking hours. There's room to ascertain the best parking rate. But I think moving forward is the right step right now. Short-term parking spaces and loading zones are a great inclusion, for sure. But I know when we discussed this motion, when Councillor Henry first kind of brought it forward, it was discussed as a possible precursor to paid parking elsewhere as needed or as warranted. But if every neighbourhood can wield the "it's not fair to start here" card, it effectively blocks any efforts everywhere. So that's why I'm happy to second the amended motion, and I also look forward to hearing Council's questions and the discussion to come.
Thank you very much, and I'll turn over to Councillor Vasic for questions of either staff or the mover of the motion.
Thanks. Yeah, this is for you, Councillor Henry. Just some curious for your thoughts, and I think Councillor Bonagor makes a good point about the market warrants it because the private institutions public institutions, the universities are able to charge for parking. But just curious, one of the points in the report is about students and sort of the increase in costs for students. And so curious how you'd respond for students for whom just the thought of having another fee or another thing to do, or whether it's even though it might appear to be just a small amount in parking in comparison to all the other fees that come along with commuting to a university or living in town and paying tuition and all that, but it is just another thing. So just curious how you attend to those anxieties and concerns students might express.
And I think that's fair comment, Councillor Vasek, and certainly what we heard. I would point council to amended recommendation number 4. The council affirms existing policies around parking management, which require all property owners to meet their regular parking needs on their own properties rather than relying on public roadways. So anybody who is residing inside Northdale today, whether they're students or whether they are part of the increasingly diverse community that we have there. The last census showed, in fact, we have 205 kids 14 and under in Northdale as of May 2021, which I think is exceptional. But just to show the neighborhood is changing. But I think it's important to recognize that everyone living in those developments, their parking needs are required by the city, and were required when those were built, to be provided for on private land. Almost all of that private land charges unbundled separately for parking at a rate, consistent with some of the lower rates in the city uptown permit lots today, and charges for visitor spaces hourly parking with a mix of rates, some $2 an hour, some higher, some with 30 minutes free, there's a range of different options that are being provided, but parking both on a permit basis and on a visitor basis for those private parking areas for folks residing in the neighborhood or for the businesses in that neighborhood are supposed to be provided by on-site. Those were comments from transportation in every single application for development inside Northdale. Now, for those that are visiting or commuting in, again, the institutions, the post-secondary institutions, are and have for a long time been required by the city to be able to meet their parking needs on site. So if you are commuting in from another place, you should have the expectation that when you arrive at your destination, that you would use one of their parking facilities, and they charge market rate for parking, either on a permit basis or on a visitor basis. This was a question I actually put in the consultations we had and the meeting we had with one of the groups when we talked about commuters coming in and not having options, and so coming into park, and then there not being space sometimes at lots on at Wilfrid Laurier, and so then going out to the street. And so my question back was, so you're coming into the city with an expectation to pay for parking. There was no room to pay for parking, so it's free, therefore it needs to be free. And I struggle with that logic. I understand the concern around paid parking and around expenses. Paying for cars is certainly not a path to equity. They are incredibly expensive to maintain, between $8,000 and $12,000 a year before all of this gas price inflation, according to the CAA. So it's important that there be non-car mechanisms for people to come in, but I think we have to recognize that there has for a long time been an obligation for private parking to be provided on private lots for folks coming in, that those are often paid already, and that avoiding that by using public parking has never been a policy of the city and would not be supported as a regular ongoing use anywhere else in the city. And so my contention is it shouldn't be here.
Thanks very much. I appreciate that a lot.
Excellent. I'll just pause for a moment because I think we're ready to call the vote. Councillor Freeman, please go ahead.
Through you, Mayor Jaworski, to Councillor Henry, can you just help me understand a little bit more? And I guess I'm worried that in other parts of the city, people will ask for the same. And I guess I'm thinking in my ward, there's Conestoga College. And so what we did as a city was we identified Marsland Drive to be no parking during weekdays, certain hours of the day, to drive home the notion that it is the responsibility of the institution to provide parking, and the majority of students that attend Conestoga College indeed do commute to the college. And so I guess I'm trying to get a sense of what do you envision the outcome of this decision as a precedent setting piece elsewhere in the city where you have similar pressures. And also I like even within some of my residential neighborhoods, there's homes that are being used for Airbnbs and homes that are permanently leased out to multiple tenants. And there's a challenge with parking associated with that. Do you think this should ultimately be like spread more broadly across the city, or do you think the proximity just to the two universities is the basis upon which this decision is being made? I'm trying to create in my mind's eye a clear understanding that can differentiate this from being used as precedent setting.
Well, certainly appreciate the question, Councillor Freeman, and since every council is new and every situation over the next 5, 10, 15 years will be new, it's hard not to, not to predict exactly how the future will unfold and what the needs, will evolve to be. But I would think about it this way, and this is how I've tried to differentiate it in comments and in the motion. There's a difference in sort of residential parking areas on street between sort of regular ongoing reliance on the public right of way for private vehicle storage, and the occasional use of that kind of space by visitors, service vehicles, or others who are here for a short time or for a day or two every now and then. We always hosted large gatherings at Christmas, and you'd spill out into the roadway a little bit for times. But these are infrequent and not regular everyday occurrences. That's what's different today here, and I think that's where we are really at a fork in the road. Either we would take an approach similar to other mid-sized communities with universities, and like we have taken in some parts of this city, and just ban on-street parking during the day, as we've done on Marsland Drive, as we've done in Beechwood Park, and in some of those other areas west of Westmount, as Kitchener has done in areas around Conestoga College Dune campus. So, I mean, that's the typical approach, and that's an approach we've taken in other places. I think this neighborhood is unique in terms of, the density and mix of its uses, that there's clearly value in on-street parking, and rather than ban it, it is something that ought to be leveraged for the high demand and frequent violations that it is, to be better managed in a way that helps advance the goals and vision of the neighborhood. That's why the original motion and direction spoke to where the net proceeds would go in terms of further advancing active transportation infrastructure that would provide further alternatives for people to get here. And that's what I'd see as the differentiator today from this area and this situation and many other areas that probably will never be at a point where you see sort of regular ongoing usage, widespread, long-standing violations, and where bylaw enforcement doesn't have a mitigating effect on those single property issues that sort of spill out into neighborhoods. So that's the differentiation that I would see. But I don't want to sort of preclude the idea that other places at other times in the future might not look at their situation and say, you know what, something else than what we're doing would work better, and we should have the conversation. So I don't mean to say this can't be a precedent for having conversations, but I don't see how it is in too many other places in the city right now, given that constraint and that framing that I provided here, and that makes sense, I think, to me in this moment.
Thanks. May I ask some follow-up questions of staff?
Go ahead.
So one of the pieces, at least as I understood it, associated with and sorry if Councillor Henry has an answer to these questions too. I'm not trying to preclude his input. One of the reasons why I know that we did the on-street parking ban along Marsland Drive was because we didn't want to compete as a municipality for the parking revenue associated with students attending Conestoga College. Does anyone, whether it's Councillor Henry or staff, perceive that the city could be seen as competing for that parking revenue? So that's one of the questions I have. And my second question is, you know, Councillor Henry provided some strong rationale associated with my question as it related to precedent setting, and how that might spill to other parts of the city or neighborhoods. And I just wanted to understand if staff feel that that reasoning is compelling and whether or not they're in a strong position to be able to agree with that reasoning. So if they get asked by proponents or the universities or others, whether or not staff can lean into that that rationale and make a strong case for it. I really do agree with this notion that if people want to own multiple vehicles, and or if land developments occur that who made commitments to managing the needs for parking associated with their planning and development applications, that they do have an obligation to manage that. And it's not our responsibility as a city to provide on-street parking for free at an alternative to their commitments and requirements that they need to do. So I do agree with that aspect of all of this. I just would like some insight on the two questions. The first one related to competing for revenues with the university, and the second one associated with staff's confidence in being able to support the rationale for not implementing this in other parts of the city.
Through you, Chair, to Councillor Freeman. With respect to the first question, it isn't my perception that paid on-street parking in this neighborhood would compete with Laurier for the reasons of the comments that staff heard from the Wilfrid Laurier University Graduate Student Association when we met with them to gather public engagement, and the comment that sometimes people commuting into the region aren't able to find parking on the Laurier site. So from that perspective, I don't perceive that there would be a competition piece. With respect to the rationale, I'm going to defer to Chris Kaler or Ron Ormson with respect to the rationale for implementing this in this area of the city, or with the questions regarding the second question you've asked for.
Thank you, Christine. Through Mayor Jaworski to Councillor Freeman, the rationale that we've used over the years with respect to parking in the university areas and the Conestoga College area has always been to try and be fair to everyone. You're right, with Marsland Drive, we did consciously take away the parking during the day to ensure that parking was met on site. And we always want to ensure that those businesses, services such as the universities, do try and meet their parking on site. We've always said that we want visitors to be able to use the on-street parking, but we don't want visitors staying over our 3-hour limit, which is why we have the 3-hour limit. And the same in the same vein, we have the no overnight parking between 2:30 a.m. and 6 a.m. So those pieces are very important to be consistent across the city. And I think that's what we've done up until now. Back in, and I'll date myself here, back in the day, we did have pay parking on King Street in the Uptown, but that was removed. And we do have the parkade, and we have the parking lots for long-term parking, but we still have the 2-hour free limit in the parking lots. So it's a balance across the city. I'm not sure if I've answered the question or not.
Yeah, I think it's a good start. I mean, it sounds to me as though if council were to approve this motion today, that at the document that's provided here and the rationale provided by Councillor Henry, and if council supports this motion, they are inherently supporting that rationale, that's something that staff could stand behind, and you've outlined how it has been done in the past and how we do have different parts of the city that have different needs. And so I appreciate that. And unless someone has something else to add, I don't think I need to drill deeper on this point.
Thank you. And I'll turn over to Councillor Bodley for the final question and comment. Please go ahead.
Thank you, through your Mayor Jaworski. This is a question of clarification. So I know in the original discussion that we had on this, there was no sort of specificity about what the paid on-street parking program may or may not look like. So there was discussion around potentially it being, 1 hour free or 2 hours free or 30 minutes free, and that it might be $1 an hour, or it might be for the day, or what have you. Did we sort of delve into that conversation at this stage during the engagement? And do we have any information in that regard? Or would that be something that would be advanced should council approve this amended motion?
Through you, Chair, could I ask Councillor Bodley that you repeat that question, please?
Sorry, my apologies. So there was was there any engagement I didn't see any in the report, but perhaps I missed it, but informal or otherwise, about if an on-street paid parking program were to exist, what it might look like in terms of how much we would charge, or whether we would permit a certain allotment of time for free before charging. Was that brought up at all as part of the discussion, even informally?
Through you, Chair, hourly rates were not included in the public engagement component. It was noted in the public engagement component that paid parking would be considered between the hours of 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. Monday to Friday. Parking beyond those hours would remain at no charge, with the no overnight parking provision remaining in place between 2:30 a.m. and 6 a.m. And that time would be able to be purchased in allotments of 3 hours at a time.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. And my question, I guess, to Councillor Henry on the amended motion here would be whether or not Councillor Henry has any feedback or thoughts on, theoretically, whether we might advance a paid on-street parking program that was 1 hour free and then you pay afterwards, or if there's any thought from his perspective about what that may or may not look like.
Thank you, Councillor Bodley, for the question. I contemplated, whether to add a whole bunch of things into what's here beyond what's there on further investigation. I don't want to dive into it too much, other than to suggest I think it's a fair question as staff do some further investigation to dive in a bit more on pay rates. My supposition as to why we didn't see that in this report in detail was probably because it wasn't recommending a program at this time, and so didn't deal with those details. And so I think those details are needed and should come with some engagement as well. I did as I noted in comments, I did my own scan on what was sort of going on in the neighborhood. It's not exhaustive because unless you actually try to pay for parking in lots of places, it's not clear what you have to pay. But I think that's something that can use a bit more, a bit of thought as this would come back further from staff to next council.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Henry, and thank you to staff on this. Just a brief comment on my perspective. I'm happy to support the amended motion that's coming forward here. To me, it's I think it's sort of legalizing something that's already happening. Is in part how I see it. There is what we're hearing in the engagement, and what you can see when you drive in that area or walk in that area, is that folks are abusing the 3 hour parking limit that we have imposed. and hoping they don't get a ticket in many ways. And I think this is actually from an equity perspective, or for a more equitable way of distributing parking in this area. It's letting folks know that if they're parking in this area, that they can that they can do so, and they can do so for a lengthy period of time should they wish, and not have to worry about whether or not that there's an enforcement officer in the area. And I think it'll actually help staff from an enforcement perspective as well too. So I'm happy to support it. Those are my comments. Appreciate it. Thank you. Back to you, Mayor Jaworski.
Thank you, and I see no further hands up, so I'm going to move to calling the vote, beginning with Ward 1, please.
Councillor Hanmer, in favor.
Councillor Bodley, in favor.
Councillor Veith, in favor.
Councillor Freeman, in favor.
Councillor Vassic, in favor.
Councillor Henry, in favor.
Councillor Bonagor, in favor.
And the mayor's in favor too. That carries unanimously. Thank you very much to the teams who have done a lot of work researching this and putting it in council's hands for final decision making. I will note that we do plan on having some formal public meetings today. So if you'd like to speak at the formal public meetings, please call the clerk's office at 519-747-8705 to be added to the list of delegations for any of the 4 formals coming up. I'll just note to council that we will be terminating this meeting at 5 p.m. and we do have 9 more staff reports to get through and 3 formals. So I'll just note that on the succinctness of questions and answers going back and forth. So we move on to item E, which is the micromobility implementation plan and traffic and parking bylaw update prepared by Louise Finley, who is presumably here for any questions on this item. And first up, I have Councillor Henry. Please go ahead.
Thank you for the report. Very exciting. Louise, I see in the report, section 2A on page 145, it notes that the regional council directed the staff to incorporate e-bikes into the RFP. I'm wondering what our sort of view and next steps would be on e-bikes if those come back positively from the RFP, since I think they're a critical part of these kinds of services as they're evolving now, and to micromobility initiatives in this city.
Through you, Chair Jaworski, to you, Councillor Freeman, or sorry, Councillor Henry, I apologize. We would want to see what we would need to do public engagement on the e-scooters to allow them for personal vehicles, but they're looking at them as part of the package for the shared micromobility. So I can't say how the public would feel about them. I can't. We would need to do public engagement on that.
So for clarity, we approve this if what comes back from the region is no e-bikes as part of this micromobility initiative, just e-scooters, we're fine. But if e-bikes come back as per the RFP as part of this, we have to say, whoa, we've got to stop and do some more public engagement before we authorize any of this on city roads, notwithstanding this agreement. Is that where we're at?
No, sorry, I misinterpreted your question. I apologize. So the pilot would allow for the e-bikes to be on the roadway, so in on-road bike lanes. They should the operator come back with e-bikes, we would need to geofence trails, multi-use trails, and multi-use pathways as a no-ride zone. They would flip to a pedal bike. So they would be geofenced for the trails, but be allowed to be motorized or power assisted on the roadway and in the bike lanes.
I'm just stewing with that, but that's fine. You can move ahead, Mayor.
Yeah, it was a complicated discussion at regional council, and that's something that it came forward from the proponents that the proponents who can supply e-bikes, that they can actually geofence them and set various speeds for them based on where they are. So I think that's how regional council decided to move forward to seeing if this was possible through an RFP. I'll move to Councillor Freeman next.
Through Mayor Jaworski. Thanks for the report, Louise. Really appreciate it. We've been having this conversation as well in our WCAG committee associated with e-bikes. And I realize that this particular motion is dealing specifically with this micro-mobility implementation plan, and that it's really the region driving this plan. And so I get that, but I'm really, I would really like to see that we amend the traffic and parking bylaw to also allow e-bikes. Like, I don't know whether people know this, but technically you're not permitted to operate a battery assisted bicycle on any of our multi-use trails in the city. That's what our current bylaws says. And that means exactly what Louise said, that people who own power assisted bicycles are required to switch them over to non-power assisted when you're on a multi-use trail. Now, Mayor Jaworski, you own an electric bike. You don't have to disclose whether you do that on this council meeting or not. But there's an awful lot of folks for whom that power on the bike is required all the time because of physical abilities. Electric bikes are very, very heavy when the power comes off. There's entire, senior cycling groups that use power assisted bicycles as their primary tool for exercise on a daily basis. They're on our multi-use trails, and I would bet that that's exactly where we want them to be, is to support them off-road on electric bicycle. I understand that the Highway Traffic Act is a conflict to this. I understand that there's a HTA Highway Traffic Act change in definition waiting for proclamation by the Lieutenant Governor. But the reality is other municipalities have chosen to update their bylaws in contravention to the HTA to specifically permit bicycles within their multi-use trails. And obviously, if an incident occurred, the Highway Traffic Act would take precedent. But at the same time, I feel like we need to resolve this conflict, and this particular item is on our agenda for today to make some amendments to this traffic and parking bylaw. And I feel like we really need to get this right.
I'll take that as a comment, or is there a question embedded?
Well, the question becomes, we're approving something and we're not getting it right. So what are we doing here? Like, we're just like, how are we helping people to understand they're not permitted to operate electric bikes on our multi-use trails? Like, I'm trying to understand why we somehow or another seem to be fine making it. Well, and also like the geofencing we found out doesn't work. So how are we dealing with that? I just want to know, like, what are we doing? Are we going to enforce it? Are we going to turn a blind eye to it like we are right now? Like, what are we doing with this?
Well, if I look at it here, we're really dealing with the e-scooters themselves and letting everything else, letting, quote, sleeping dogs lie, so to speak. I'll turn over to Mr. Ormson.
Thanks, Mayor Jaworski. Through you to Councillor Freeman. I think staff certainly understand the goal to allow e-bikes on trails. But as Councillor Freeman has quite rightly pointed out, there is a legislative requirement that we would normally want to follow until such time as there are the proper amendments. And as you note, Mayor, the enabling regulation for e-scooters is the one that we're dealing with here today, which gives clear legislative authority to municipalities to regulate the use of e-scooters. So for safety, for you know, how they're operated, where they can and can't be used, and that type of thing. So I think we want to stay in lockstep with the area municipalities in the region for this particular component of the sort of e-mobility devices, recognizing the goal. And I agree with Councillor Freeman 100%. We want to see that gap, if you will, in the last mile, the for transportation, mobility, and accessibility and active transportation to enable at some point in the future e-bikes on trails. The other thing I will note, there's a significant difference in the speeds as well, and also, as was mentioned, the weight of an e-bike. There are some safety things that I think we would want to look at considering very carefully, because there is a difference in the e-scooters and the speed that's being regulated by the province. They're going to be restricted to 24 kilometers an hour. And I think e-bikes can travel much faster than that. So there are some nuances there, and I think staff can take this away for sure, and we can figure out how we can push the envelope on allowing e-bikes on multi-use pathways. But for today, what's before council is is essentially this pilot that we're trying to look at. Hopefully that helps a little bit.
It does a lot, Dan. It's a good reminder. Yes, e-bikes, I think, are limited to 32 in Ontario, but the concern at Regional Council is for an e-bike rental program of what renters would do. But I think we've all seen those e-bikes, those provinces trying to differentiate between I think, 3 types of e-bikes and come up with different rules for the ones that kind of look exactly like a motorcycle except with a battery engine. I'll turn over to Councillor Bonagor for comments.
Thank you, through you, Mayor Jaworski. I just wanted to say I found that this report was quite helpful. I think it will be helpful as we start to clarify rules around e-scooters and e-bikes, because we already have them in our community, as Councillor Freeman has so eloquently pointed out. I just, for Ward 7 in particular, I still do have reservations about short-term rental programs. They made an absolute mess of uptown trails, and they actually made it markedly more difficult for cyclists and pedestrians last time around. So as this moves forward, I would certainly be looking for some robust controls here, and also some protections for users in terms of privacy around their data and their personal information. I also just wanted to flag, possibly for you, Mayor, just the strange, weird little conflict in this discussion. We see the region putting all this effort into micro-mobility rental programs, which are often for people who are able-bodied and can afford them, but there's still radio silence in terms of whether the GRT can run a shuttle or a bus of some kind to the Seniors Pavilion and Recreation Complex on Father David Bauer Drive. So that's just an interesting ordering of priorities that I'm just going to flag and leave with the regional councillor sitting among us. Thank you.
Thank you for the homework assignment, Councillor Bonagor. With that, I'll look for, we've had some discussion on this, see if anybody wants to move and second this item. And let me just scroll down here. Moved by Councillor Veith, seconded by Councillor Bodley. I'll take the vote, beginning with Ward 1, please.
Councillor Hanmer in favor.
Councillor Bodley in favor.
Councillor Veith in favor.
Councillor Freeman in favor.
Councillor Vasek in favor.
Councillor Henry in favor.
Councillor Bonagor in favor.
And the mayor's in favor too. That carries unanimously. Thank you very much, Louise. Look forward to seeing you on the trails somewhere around town. Next up, we have item F, same team, prepared by Chris Hodgson, funding release for transportation services projects and programs. A few projects there, and I'll certainly do a shout out to what's item number 2 there, which is the funding for the Laurel Creek Trail around the conservation area project. And should this get approved, that kicks off the the project that we look towards moving or making a loop trail around the conservation area. Could you just tell us a bit about that, Chris?
Yes, good afternoon, Mayor Jaworski, members of council. So this was a vision several years ago and built into the budgeting process for a kind of off-road trail system around the Laurel Creek. And when I say off-road, it's still within road right-of-way. Just want to clarify that compared to off-road trails such as Spurline. And in addition to being part of the linking to many of the neighborhoods and connecting to some of the broader active networks around that area, it will also kind of create a mechanism for many of the city's events, like running events and cycling events and charity events and things like that, without the participants having to cross a road, because it will all be kind of around the boundary of the Laurel Creek. So pieces already in play, and this funding release is obviously to start the process, the planning and design process for other parts of that loop. But a very exciting long-term project, this one.
Excellent. I saw the picture or the map on page 161. Just gives some reality to it for the coming years, Chris. So thank you very much. I don't see any further questions. Moved by Councillor Veith, second by Councillor Bodley. Councillor Bodley has a brief comment. Please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you through you, Mayor Jaworski. Just to highlight that trail there, I think it's going to be exceptional community asset when it's completed. And the piece that was finished last year that connects on Laurel Drive between Beaver Creek and Fisher Holman as it is today. I mean, I used to walk in that area on the narrow sidewalk on the south side of Laurel Drive with some frequency, and of course, when you would come across other pedestrians, you were, deking in and out and dodging each other. And so I think that actually depressed the number of pedestrians that were in the area and cyclists in the area. And you actually see now, since the trail has been built there, it is so exceptionally well used and appreciated. And I think it speaks volumes to what we're going to ultimately end up getting when it goes around the entire Laurel Creek Conservation Area sometime in the future. So thank you for advancing this, and it's super exciting.
Thank you. I can attest to the fact that Laurel Trail is quite well used. When I'm out on my e-bike, I always stay to the road, though, because I understand it would be wise to ride on a multi-use trail. Let's take the vote, beginning with Ward 1.
Councillor Hanmer in favor.
Councillor Bodley in favor.
Councillor Veith in favor.
Councillor Freeman in favor.
Councillor Vasic in favor.
Councillor Henry in favor.
Councillor Bonagor in favor.
And the mayor's in favor too. That carries unanimously. Thank you very much, Chris. Moving on quickly to item G, we have the Environment and Climate Change Canada Low Carbon Economy Challenge grant proposal. It's prepared for us by Scott Prevost and Brad Witzel, and looking to council if they have any questions on this item. Moved by Councillor Freeman. Second by Councillor Hanmer. And Councillor Henry, quick comment. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. Certainly this will be good news if we get it, and thanks to staff for the work. I'd note council had received from facility staff that the incremental cost of doing the GHG transformation, the energy transformation that we need to make in our facilities through the early 2040s is about 42 million. If successful, this would cover up to 2/3 of the incremental cost of GHG reductions in this project over baseline, which I think would be fantastic support from the senior levels of government that we indicated were necessary to reach our 50 by 30 goals for reductions. And that ultimately this would reduce that $42 million number by up to $1 million, and then construction costs. So who knows? But that this is one of the ways that we have an opportunity to reach our goals through support through programs like this, to be able to do more than we can do otherwise. So thank you to staff for advancing this.
Excellent. Thank you for that wrap up, Councillor Henry. I'll do the voting beginning with Ward 1, please.
Councillor Hanmer in favor.
Councillor Bodley in favor.
Councillor Veith in favor.
Councillor Freeman in favor.
Councillor Bassick in favor.
Councillor Henry in favor.
Councillor Bonagor in favor.
And the mayor's in favor too. That carries unanimously. Thank you both for your great work on this, and let's cross our fingers. Moving forward to item H, the pandemic response survey results. Extensive and good reading. Thank you, Sandy Van Solm and Tony Averoni for putting this together. And we'll just look to see what people have to say. Certainly, Councillor Freeman is ready to move it. And I would say it's a great snapshot of what has happened, that we don't just move forward without looking back at this unprecedented event and see how it impacted our community, our staff, our ability to get work done, to respond to I wouldn't say disaster, but an impact of unprecedented proportions, and to have that information and for us to look at. God willing, it never happens again, but something similar surely will. I have it seconded now by Councillor Hanmer. I do not see any hands up for questions, but thank you for the extensive survey, and thanks for everyone for participating in the survey. And I'll do the call the question beginning with Ward 1, please.
Councillor Hanmer in favor.
Councillor Bodley in favor.
Councillor Veith in favor.
Councillor Freeman in favor.
Councillor Bassick in favor.
Councillor Henry in favor.
Councillor Bonagor in favor.
And the mayor's in favor too. That carries unanimously. Again, thank you for that, the effort on this important survey. We do have some formal public meetings coming up today and tonight. If you'd like to participate, please call the clerk's office at 519-747-8705 to be added to list of delegations. Item I is notice of approval for expropriation report prepared for us by Christina Marina, and there's further information there on the municipal address, 123 Moore Avenue South. Does anybody wish to have any questions on this, or do I have a mover on this? Ward Councillor would like to move. I'll just get a seconder. We'll come back to seconded by Councillor Freeman. Go ahead, Councillor Bonagor.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Jaworski, I just wanted to say that taking this action, it promises to alleviate a number of concerns at a somewhat troublesome intersection. There are site concerns and trail connection constraints. So hopefully this will get us to a point where we can make this intersection much better for particularly children crossing that intersection to get to school, but all users as we invest in active transit through this part of the city. Thanks.
Excellent. Very true. Such a tiny intersection is so complicated. With that, I will take the vote beginning with Ward 1, please.
Councillor Hanmer in favor.
Councillor Bodley in favor.
Councillor Veith in favor.
Councillor Freeman in favor.
Councillor Bassick in favor.
Councillor Henry in favor.
Councillor Bonagor in favor.
And Mayor Jaworski is in favor too. That carries unanimously. Thank you very much, Christina, on bringing this to us. And as I look forward to item J, wow, 17 William Street East, a well-coveted property. And it's a report prepared for us by Adam Lauder and Christina Marina, and bringing this hydro property into community hands for a future civic area. I'll just pause to see if there's any moved by the ward councillor with comment, seconded by. Don't be shy. Councillor Bodley, please go ahead, Councillor Bonagor.
Thank you, through you, Mayor Jaworski. I just wanted to say that this is a great location and it's a key green link between Heritage Green and City Hall, the Spurline Trail and Regina Street. And I think being able to get this property means that we start pulling together the pieces to really create that key part of the Uptown Public Realm strategy and make it a reality. So thank you to everyone involved, and I look forward to seeing some great stuff here in the future.
A great anchor site, that's for sure. With that, I'll call the vote, beginning with Ward 1.
Councillor Hanmer in favor.
Councillor Bodley in favor.
Councillor Veith in favor.
Councillor Freeman in favor.
Councillor Vasek in favor.
Councillor Henry in favor.
Councillor Bonagor in favor.
Mayor's in favor too. That passes unanimously. That'll be a great asset. Item K, planning matter, part lot control exemption, Parkwood Mennonite Home Inc., 700 to 730 New Hampshire Street, and 858 to 888 Atlantic Boulevard. We have this on the docket now, and I'm just wondering if there's anybody who has any questions of this. Moved by the ward councillor with comment, seconded by Councillor Vasek. Please go ahead, Councillor Freeman.
Thank you, through Mayor Jaworski. I will vote in favor too, so I don't need to make another comment later. I just wanted to bring to council's attention that this is a very exciting project that will bring online affordable housing for seniors as well as additional housing for seniors. Parkwood has been stewarding this program and process for a few years, but really a short number of few years considering how long sometimes these projects can take. And kudos to Ms. Shantz and her team. They're really great. And I also want to shout out to city planning staff. I know that you have prioritized these applications, that you have looked at every avenue of opportunity to advance these proposals in as timely of a manner as possible. So thank you very much to city staff for bringing this to us today and for putting it on in the revised agenda.
Very well said. Yeah, it was great to do the groundbreaking there at that site with you, Councillor Freeman. We'll continue the voting with Councillor Vasek. Please go ahead.
Councillor Vasek in favor.
Councillor Henry in favor.
Councillor Bonagor in favor.
Councillor Hanmer in favor.
Councillor Bodley in favor.
Councillor Veith in favor.
And the mayor's in favor too. That passes unanimously. But don't go away, because item L, Section 40 Planning Act, parking exemption request, Parkwood Mennonite Home Inc. Same addresses. Pretty much same thing, different, this time moved by Councillor Freeman, seconded by Councillor Vasek. Thank you very much, Mr. Cotter, for bringing these items here, and there's probably more from you yet to come. We'll do the voting beginning with Ward 1, please.
Councillor Hanmer in favor.
Councillor Bodley in favor.
Councillor Veith in favor.
Councillor Freeman in favor.
Councillor Vasek in favor.
Councillor Henry in favor.
Councillor Bonagor in favor.
And the mayor's in favor too. That carries unanimously. Item M, right of entry bylaw, Uptown Waterloo Urban Growth Center report prepared for us by Mr. Cotter. I'll just put us in Councillor's hands, Councillor Bonagor, and then we have some movers. Go ahead, Councillor Bonagor.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Jaworski, I just wanted a question of clarification for residents in the area. I mean, there are a number of residential blocks in this zone. Just to be very clear for anyone who's listening now or listening in at a future date, like, these residents won't be forced to watch their property be torn up in order for another property owner to develop or access their site, will they?
Through you, Mayor Jaworski, to Councillor Bonagor. No, the intention is to, if there's temporary access that would be required to a property, ideally the neighbors would talk to each other and they would make an arrangement. But in the rare event that agreement couldn't be reached and there was a need to, do some minor alterations or modifications to a building, that a temporary access could be granted and that the lands would have to be returned to their pre-existing state. So it's a tool that the city has to address kind of very urban situations, and that's why it is limited to the urban growth center, where a number of the properties have zero lot line setbacks, which makes, in some instances, the need for access to adjacent lands necessary for basic building repairs, window replacements, those types of items.
Great. That's great. Thank you so much for clarifying.
Excellent. With that, I have a mover in Councillor Freeman, seconded by Councillor Bonagor. Let's do the voting, beginning with Ward 1, please.
Councillor Hanmer in favor.
Councillor Bodley in favor.
Councillor Veith in favor.
Councillor Freeman in favor.
Councillor Bassick in favor.
Sorry, Councillor Henry in favor.
Councillor Bonagor in favor.
And Mayor Jaworski is in favor too. That carries unanimously. Thank you again, Mr. Cotter. And we are done that section. Let me just make sure. We are. Well done, team. Moving on to public meetings. If you'd like to speak at the public meetings today, please call the clerk's office at 519-747-8705 to be added to the list of delegations. This is a formal, hold on, don't want to get ahead of myself here. This is a formal public meeting to consider community benefits charge bylaw and Parkland dedication bylaw update. Formal public meeting. Any persons who want further notice of this application, including the passage of any bylaw, should contact Michael Puglisi at 519-886-2310, extension 30264, or at his email address, michaeliese@waterloo.ca. Will the clerk please advise council of the method used to give notice of this meeting and the dates notice was given?
Notice was advertised in the Waterloo Chronicle on June 16th and 23rd, 2022.
Thank you. And I think I'm going straight to delegations, Michael, and we have a delegation, Stefan from Hempson Consulting here.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, you sound great, Stefan.
Great, thank you. So as you mentioned, Mr. Mayor, this is a public meeting that's part of a process to bring forward a new community benefits charge and Parkland dedication bylaws for council's consideration in September 2022. And it follows a presentation that we made to City Council in May 16th last on the new community benefits charge legislation. Next slide. I'm going to speak for about 10 minutes and then hand it over to you for questions and delegations. But just a quick recap of that new community benefits charge, or CBC, legislation. The old density bonusing provisions of the Planning Act, which allowed the city to strike agreements with developers for local community infrastructure in return for additional building height and development density, have now been replaced by a new community benefits charge authority. And under that authority, the city can impose a community benefits charge against higher density development, provided it's 5 or more stories in height and it contains 10 or more residential units. So effectively apartment units. In order to do that, it has to pass a bylaw and it has to undertake a strategy similar to a development charges study, but not quite as detailed. That strategy has now been done and it's been released on the city's website. And it sets out the services and the costs that could be used for the new community benefits charge were council to impose it. Very important couple of distinctions about this charge that distinguish it from a typical development charge is that in-kind contributions in lieu of the charge are permitted, and there's also a cap on any individual payments of the charge, and that cap is set at 4% of the land value of the specific development, with the land value being calculated as of the day before the building permit is issued. Next slide, please. I mentioned back in May to council that the CBCs are quite broad in their application. They can fund pretty much any kind of capital cost as long as it is related to expanding the servicing needs in response to new development and redevelopment in the city. And this here, that first bullet that you see there, that's the list of services that have been included in the CBC strategy that was released. So there is a service for CBC strategies themselves and the cost associated with those strategies. There is a service for the expansion of parking, city parking infrastructure. That will be transferred from the development charge bylaw into the community benefits charge bylaw because it is no longer eligible for development charge funding. There's funding provided to, in part, pay for grants that the city is committed to engage nonprofit and for-profit developers in the construction of affordable housing. There's a service for public realm infrastructure in the core area and in Northdale in order to facilitate redevelopment in those areas. There's also provision for public art, the installation of public art in intensification areas, for initiatives within major transit station areas to allow redevelopment to occur within those areas, and then to cover off projects that were previously funded by the old density bonusing, and which the city would presumably want to continue to fund moving forward, like the installation of electric vehicle charge stations, for example. As I mentioned back in May, the strategy requires that a link be established between the servicing needs of the development that will pay the charge, that is the mid-rise or high-rise apartment units, and the costs that are included in the strategy. So there's quite a lot of discussion in the strategy about establishing that nexus test between the two. Next slide, please. There's no prescribed process for public consultation for a community benefits charge bylaw, but we are sort of following a fairly extensive consultation process nonetheless. So this public meeting today is not required, but we thought it would be a good idea before the summer recess to hold one. And we will continue to consult with those representatives of the development industry who ultimately would be paying the new charge over the summer before bringing a bylaw to you in, as I say, in September. Once the bylaw is passed, there is a right of appeal of the bylaw and the charges themselves, and those appeals are adjudicated at the Ontario Land Tribunal. After the bylaw is in place, the new legislation requires that monies collected through the CBC are held in a single special account, which is essentially a reserve fund. And the city will have to go through an exercise annually to spend or allocate at least 60% of those funds every year. And there are also annual reporting requirements and a requirement that you review the bylaw every 5 years. Next slide, please. The new legislations prescribes a methodology for determining the charge. So you have to do a forecast of future development, specifically the kind of development that's going to pay the charge. So the mid-rise and high-rise apartments. You have to estimate the increase in need for service that's arising from the new development. So those would be the services that I just mentioned. And you have to identify projects and the cost of those projects in the strategy as well, which we've done, and I'll get to in the next slide. And you have to also identify the extent to which the cost of those projects can be funded by external grants or other kinds of subsidies, the extent to which the projects will benefit existing residents in the city, because that you won't be able to fund through the CBC, and then to the extent that that some of the benefit of some of the projects might extend beyond the planning horizon that that we're looking to calculate the charge over. That so-called post-period benefit is also excluded from the charge calculation. Next slide, please. So on the development forecast, you'll find details of that in section 3 of the strategy that's been published. We've calculated the charge to recover costs over the next 10 years, over a period to 2031. And we've done it on the basis of 3 growth options for the city that are set out in the land needs assessment report that was released by the region as part of its municipal comprehensive review in April. So as I'm sure you're aware, you know, the region is the region's review still hasn't settled on a sort of a population target for the city, or indeed a sort of how housing will be planned for, and the mix of housing that's required in order to achieve, you know, a fixed population. So the way we've done this is to give you a range of potential CBC revenue based on various options that are laid out in the region's report. And there are 3 options, and you can see from the table here, we have sort of extrapolated from the information about those options to determine how many units, how many new housing units would be constructed under each option, how many of those would be eligible to pay the community benefits charge, and what percentage of the total units then, and what percentage of the population in those units would accrue under each option. And so those percentages on the right-hand column, those are the ones that are really used to establish that nexus test, the benefits of these projects and how we can reasonably assign the benefits to the new development that will be paying the charge. Next slide, please.
Just a reminder, you're past the 9-minute mark, so 1 minute left if you can.
Okay, this slide just summarizes the costs for each of the services. The important column is the column on the right, the 26.7 million. That's what's eligible for CBC funding. Next slide, please. And then here, the 2 columns of importance are the first column of figures, which is the revenue estimate for the community benefits charge, ranging from 3.7 million to 5.2 million. And then the second column is the 26.7 million that is eligible for CBC funding. So the takeaway here is the cap on payments will limit the extent to which you can fund these costs through this charge. Next slide, please. Just finally then, the Parkland dedication bylaw is very much an administrative exercise. Next slide. The city currently secures land and cash in lieu from developers for parks. And legislative amendments require that if you're going to continue to impose an alternative rate for Parkland, that you repass a bylaw by September of this year, September the 18th. So we're going to go through an exercise to essentially repass the existing bylaw and keep exactly the same provisions that are in place, with a view to updating them in the future to reflect, among other things, the Parkland strategy that you heard about today. The next steps are on the next slide, but I've sort of described how we're going to consult with the industry over the summer, bring you forward bylaws for your review in September. The development charge study update would follow after that date. Thank you. That
Excellent.
concludes my presentation.
Yeah, thank you. And with that, I'm going to turn over to Councillor Henry has a question on that. Please go ahead.
Thanks, Mayor, and thanks, Evan, for that presentation. You answered my first question, which was clarifying that what we are doing with the Parkland dedication bylaw and how it's sort of a stopgap until we sort of incorporate a number of items ahead of future budget cycles and update rates potentially accordingly. So thank you for that. Slide 5, you noted the 3 sort of growth scenarios that the region had identified. Just for council's information on this, the region put out a preferred growth strategy on Friday that they will consider on Wednesday of this week. It appears, without having done the analysis myself, to take into account council's feedback, and now is looking at an 83% intensification rate in Waterloo and a lower DGA sort of rate, which would suggest to me that that there would be a higher mix of CBC eligible units that would result. So my question, Stefan, from that, given how oversubscribed the program is to the revenue we can get, that suggests to me this collection is conservative, but there isn't really anything we need to do about updating numbers, no matter what the region sort of does on Wednesday. Because the collection is going to be the collection, given it's set at land value rather than a per unit rate like DC's, and that there's nothing that we would need to do to sort of incorporate that data, because it would just be a little bit higher or lower than the window, but it wouldn't materially affect our sort of capital planning or other things, or certainly any of the math or regulations we need to do in passing this bylaw. Am I correct in thinking about it that way?
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor. I suppose if the region was going to proceed and things panned out so that you grew by more CBC eligible units than we'd anticipated here, then that would narrow the gap that's been identified in the strategy. But we wouldn't, as you say, materially change any of the calculations.
Take that to say the questions are complete, or sound is off, and I'll move on.
Was just having sound issues, but yes, that was all for me. Thank you very much.
Okay, good. Thank you. Councillor Freeman, please go ahead.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Jaworski. Can I trouble staff to go back to slide 2? And in the document, you had made mention that there's a lot of flexibility in terms of how the resources can be allocated. And I was trying to understand what the value was to actually listing off the potential services as opposed to leaving it kind of more wide open as permitted by the legislation.
Well, through you, Mr. Mayor, it's a good question. We're not, in my view, required to set things out in the way we have. I think that it goes back to establishing the nexus test, and I think that given the right of appeal, I do think it's important that the strategy set out the services, the projects, the costs of the projects to a level of detail that justifies the charge that's in the bylaw. Of course, recognizing that from one year to the next, the priorities about how the money is spent might change. And I think that's one of the reasons why, the the legislation does require the city to look at things on a regular basis and decide how the money is going to be spent. But I do think it's important whenever you're imposing a charge on development that you set out some idea of what you think you're going to use the money for, and that's what we've tried to do through this process.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. I don't see any further questions. As the clerk informs me, and we don't have any further delegates registered. As the clerk informs me, there are no further speakers. This formal public meeting is concluded, and the application is now open to council for a motion and debate. And we'll just remind council that our recommendation here is to receive as information. So I'm happy to see a mover on that. A little debate on receiving information, second by Councillor Hanmer, and we'll do the voting beginning with Ward 1, please.
Councillor Hanmer in favor.
Councillor Bodley in favor.
Councillor Veith in favor.
Councillor Freeman in favor.
Councillor Bassick in favor.
Councillor Henry in favor.
Councillor Bonagor in favor.
And the mayor's in favor too. That carries unanimously. Thank you very much for Michael and Stefan and team for being here today for the presentation and all the work effort that's gone into this so far. But with that, we have a couple more formal public meetings to do. And if you'd like to speak at the public planning meeting here today, you can call the clerk's office at 519-747-8705. This is a formal public meeting to consider housekeeping amendments to the official plan and zoning bylaw 2018-050. Any persons who want further notice of this application, including the passage of any bylaw, should contact the planner, Dominic Simpson, at 519-747-8546 or at the email address dominik.simpson@waterloo.ca. Or contact planner Tristan DeVoe at 519-747-8753. Will the clerk please advise council of the method used to give notice of this meeting and the dates notice was given?
Notice was advertised in the Waterloo Chronicle on June 2nd, 2022, and mailed or emailed on May 31st, 2022, to all property owners within 120 meters of the subject properties, to public agencies, to all persons who signed in or spoke at the informal public meeting held on March 7th, 2022, and to all persons who requested further notice.
Thank you. I do not believe there to be a presentation. We have no delegations, so I'll look to councillors for questions. First up, Councillor Henry, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Dominic, Tristan, for this report. One question I know I asked offline, but I'll ask it here. I see that the OPA is sort of advancing the Planning Act requirements around up to 3 units a lot through either an ADU inside the building, an ADU in an accessory building, and an additional dwelling unit. But it's not going all of the way towards permitting that as of right. It's just the official plan steps. So can you tell me 2 things? First, what are the next steps in advancing those regulatory permissions as of right for accessory dwellings? In addition to the ADU in the primary building we already allow, what are the next steps in that? And in the interim, between now and then, and after this comes into force, how would residents who want to advance an ADU and an accessory dwelling do so?
Thank you, Councillor Henry, and through you, Mayor Jaworski. To answer your first question, the next steps for after the official plan policies are implemented would be for staff to look at investigating how those policies actually get implemented into the zoning bylaw. Presently, we have regulations for secondary residential units, and we also have regulations for coach houses, for units abutting laneways. So we'll be looking at more broadly how implementation from all forms, permitting both those types of units, excuse me, would look like citywide. In terms of the interim steps, should the official plan policies be approved, residents can they're able to submit a minor variance application to amend the zoning bylaw regulations, depending on what the request is. For instance, if someone wanted to put a second residential unit and a coach house on their property, that might be something that could be considered through the Committee of Adjustment, whereas the current regulations wouldn't permit both in the zoning bylaw. But with the adoption of the official plan policies, just to set that stage, hopefully those applications can be more feasible.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I've had some inquiries, and so I think it's helpful to know that there is a way that folks that are itching to get started, subject to approval today, would have a mechanism to do so while the city does the legwork on the zoning bylaw component. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And moving forward to Councillor Freeman next.
Thank you, through you, Mayor Jaworski. I have a few pieces that I wanted to cover, just so you know. So the first item is with regard to land use on page 258 of 425 of the packet. So this particular aspect, and I've had an opportunity to speak with staff about this. So it's section 10.3.2.2 business employment designation. So my understanding is under land use item 3 that the goal of this section is to facilitate a broader range of industry within the land use designation. And so it includes language at the bottom, which you'll see underlined, that says, which do not result in emissions of odor, fume, noise, cinder, including smoke, soot, ash, dust, vibrations, heat, glare, lighting, or electrical interference. So I understand that we want to create more flexibility in this zoning, but there are occasions where some light assembly, light manufacturing, and light processing operations would include emissions that, under the definition of the environment and the Ministry of the Environment, would require a permit, but those emissions would be considered negligible. Thereby, they would not be significant in nature, nor would they have the potential to create an adverse effect, shall we say, within an industrial multi-tenanted building or within prestige industrial or prestige employment land use. So I'm just going to ask staff, does this wording give you enough flexibility that if an industry came to you and they did have an environmental permit for something of this ilk, but it was essentially negligible emissions, that you would still be able to support that business to advance in these areas?
Through you, Mayor Jaworski, to Councillor Freeman, thank you for that question. Yes, I think the wording is flexible enough to at least allow for if there was a business that could demonstrate that there was negligible emissions, that through a committee of adjustment process, that business could likely proceed, again, if it goes through an approval system. The language that you're referring to in the proposed in the official plan is complementary to what is in the existing zoning bylaw. So that was our intent with that. But that is something for staff to consider and look into further for the future, how those businesses that can demonstrate significant or negligible emissions, how might they locate in these areas? It's definitely something that we can look at further through a separate process.
Yeah, that would be great. I think just for anyone who's making notes on the staff side, it's probably worthwhile
as we discussed earlier, to look at the use of language like insignificant emissions or emissions that will not cause adverse effects, because both of those terms are defined by the Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks. So my next comment is on page number, just having challenge navigating the PDF here. It's on page 286 of 425, and it is related to documents that form a complete application. There's a series A through double M, I think. And a couple of things, and these are amendments that I actually would like to see made today. So the proper acronym for the Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks is MECP. So I would like that change to be reflected in this. And then similarly in item JJ, there's a reference to the old acronym, and that needs to be changed there as well to MECP. And then under additional studies, I would like to add another one, and it is the land use compatibility study. And I'm going to turn to staff. Do you want it to say MECPD series land use compatibility study? Did you want reference to the MECP document?
Through you, Mayor Jaworski, to Councillor Freeman, it's Mr. Cotter speaking. If you could indicate land use compatibility study, including the reference to the provincial D6 guidelines, that would be appreciated.
Yeah, so that would be the change, land use compatibility study, and then I'll just do D series, because it may get amended at some time, but I think it'll still be called the D series. So I put that in the chat if that makes sense to staff. So then the only other comment I have is on page number 341, where it's item E, and it speaks to notwithstanding anything to the contrary, dwelling units shall not be permitted within 100 meters of a food and beverage manufacturing industry emission source, such as a smokestack for the existing meat processing use. This is a bit of legacy wording, I understand that, but we are amending it, and it says this regulation shall apply to all properties within 100 meters of the emission source. I think I would like the language changed to within 100 meters of the property boundary. That will be in keeping with the provincial the provincial guidelines that govern this aspect of work. And the reason is because just like any other property owner, property ownership has rights. And so industry can choose if they want to seek to expand their operations. In the case of food and beverage manufacturing industries, sometimes products are managed in non-stationary sources like refrigerator trucks, and those can be sources of significant noise or air quality emission as well. Sometimes smoke houses get constructed, and I think we're in a much more stronger position to refer to it as 100 meters of the property line or boundary, whichever is the term staff would like to use. Can Mr. Cotter, can you comment if we can make that change here?
Through you, Mayor Jaworski, to Councillor Freeman, yes, I think that change is reasonable, and it will assist staff in the application of the bylaw as well. So we can make that change.
That's great. All right, I think that was everything that I had in my notes, and so if we can, I don't know how we make those changes, Madam Clerk. I'm open to your suggestions, but those are my recommended amendments. If council has questions of me related to those amendments, please let me know.
I think we're good here. We'll just do with changes as noted, and we'll come back for clarification if we need it. Moving on
Thank
to Councillor Bonagor, then Councillor Hanmer.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Jaworski. I just have a couple of questions for clarification and then a comment. So apologies in advance, staff, for getting down in the weeds. There were just a couple of things I was hoping to get clarified. So one is the discussion of designating some decisions to staff or a delegate. And my particular interest was parking exemptions. It makes sense in many ways. I just wanted to check. We have seen some requests come through that look like a parking exemption from one perspective, but also resemble permission to build smaller units from another perspective. I'm just wondering at what point would an exemption request need to come to council, and at what point would it potentially stay with the delegate?
Through you, Mayor Jaworski, to Councillor Bonagor. Thank you for that question. So just to clarify, you're wondering when the application would proceed versus when it would
What's the
proceed
threshold?
to
I suppose.
delegate. Yeah.
What's the threshold for? Would things still come to council once they pass a certain threshold? And if I'm just curious.
Yeah, that's a good question. So staff are still need to prepare the delegation bylaw that would follow approval of these policies, so they can further set out when that threshold would happen. Typically, it would be at the discretion of the Director of Planning otherwise, if the amendment that's being requested goes outside of what might be considered minor. But if it is within the standard sort of parking exemption, in the case of those affordable housing units, that would definitely be something that would be able to be proceed forward with the Director of Planning. But if it is something more complex, then we can consider bringing that to council. But again, those details will be further ironed out through the delegation bylaw over the next coming months.
Perfect. Okay, thank you. Next finicky little question. I'm looking at the community uses and having private schools be shifted into the community uses bucket. I'm just curious about that. I know public schools are the grounds are commonly used after hours by the community. Many offer their gymnasiums up for community activity. I'm not aware of private schools carrying the same expectations. And additionally, people need to pay to attend a private school, so it's really only serving a portion of the community. So just in that light, I'm just curious about their inclusion under community use and why they've kind of been put in that bucket as opposed to, say, a business of some kind.
Absolutely. Thank you. Through you, Mayor Jaworski, to Councillor Bonagor. The intent with that was mostly because community uses are already defined in the official plan, and they explicitly state public schools, whereas we found that there's been private schools that are looking to locate in areas that are similar to public schools for the same reasons that you mentioned, playgrounds and fields, other amenities like that are very similar to public schools. And both public schools and private schools are regulated under the Education Act. So we felt that was a valuable clarification point for the official plan.
So does it carry any expectation that they would have some kind of community use aspect, given that it's kind of listed under community uses? Or is it really just a technicality? I'm just trying to understand here. Thank you.
Yep, no problem. Yeah, I would consider it more of a technicality, given the existing definition of community uses includes educational uses, and private schools simply are part of that educational umbrella. So that's the basis there.
Okay, thank you. And my last bit is a comment for staff looking at the railway holding provisions. I just want to thank you so much for your fast and very thorough response to an issue that became apparent earlier this year, and quite acutely so for some people in Ward 7. What you've put forward here in the amendments strikes, I think, a really strong middle ground. Existing homes that are near to the rail line, it allows them to be renovated and upgraded, just like other homes across the cities. But there are still some checks and balances for construction that leads to a new dwelling unit. So the other councillors weren't privy to the community discussions that we held between staff and residents, but I can certainly attest to the fact that staff have listened very, very closely to the issues that were brought up by the residents. And I think this hopefully will address all of the issues that had come up. So thank you. I know it was very, very much a time crunch, and I appreciate you getting this in under the wire. Thanks.
That's very good for staff to have worked so hard and so quickly on that item. That was particularly relevant in Ward 7. I will now go to our last question. Councillor Hanmer, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. Through you to staff, and my question is going to be regarding item number 13. That's under the zoning changes that are coming forward, and staff have worked with me on this particular issue as well. We are doing a designation change for 333 West Park, and so if staff could just explain what is happening with this one, and then my question around it is the residents there have enjoyed being able to go from West Park through to Ira Needles, and just curious if there's a possibility for us to maintain a small path somewhere in that area to allow access by path to Ira Needles.
Through you, Mayor Jaworski, to Councillor Hanmer. I just want to note that with me as well today is Natalie Hardacre in place of Tristan, who could not be here today. So for that question, I will defer to Natalie. Thanks.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you for the question, Councillor Himner, and through you, through Mayor Jaworski to you. The question related to 333 West Park Crescent, item number 13 in the zoning section of the report. What it is it's a parcel of land that's actually privately owned. It was required at the time the subdivision was completed for a secondary access. Now that there have been some connections through from the northern end, the road being built in its place, that connection is no longer required. It was originally slated to be a residential lot, and it was zoned accordingly at that time that the subdivision came through. But as I mentioned, it was required for a secondary access or emergency access at the time the subdivision was approved, until such time as the road connection was made further to the north. As a result of that, and I think at the time that it was created, there was also acknowledgement that there is a connection, a walkway connection that currently exists to further east. I'm not quite sure how many lots to the east it is, but it's not a significant distance, ensuring that, understanding, I guess, that the one connection on 333 West Park Crescent was to be temporary, that the long-term connection would still exist, albeit a bit to the east, but still exist there, so that there would be a potential access, pedestrian access, south and then across to Ira Needles. So that was the intent of that, the R4. When we created the zoning bylaw back in 2018, it was inadvertently caught under the open space zone category. And so the purpose of this amendment before you today is simply to bring it back to the R4, which it was always intended to be.
Natalie, thank you very much for that response. The residents in that area of Westville certainly understand the need to convert it back. It's no longer needed, and it goes back into the developer's hands at this time. We'll be very appreciative to know that the plans are continuing to have the more permanent access in the rest of the path trail area in the Westville community. So thank you. I appreciate that. That's it for me, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Hammer. And I'll just turn it back to Councillor Henry. Sorry, go ahead.
Thanks, Mayor. With more amendments coming in, it seems like a different process makes sense for bringing them forward than what we've worked out. I noted in the reports that while staff have amended in the official plan and the business employment area, updating the maximum building floor area for ancillary uses to go up from 1393 square meters to 1858. That wasn't carried forward in the zoning bylaw and in site-specific C117. And so those are things that we should bring forward to align those as part of approving it. I know we had a resolution drawn up, but there's clearly more stuff going on. So just looking for any help with the process and noting to council that these are things that we should correct with these recommendations as well, as recommended by staff.
Yeah, so I think I'll turn it over to Mr. Cotter, but I think we're going to be doing a motion with the minor amendments. We're going to do housekeeping with some tidying up today. Mr. Cotter?
Thank you, Mayor Jaworski. Yes, I would recommend that council proceed forward with the bylaws, subject to the minor modifications being advanced by Councillor Freeman and Councillor Henry. We've taken note of those amendments. Certainly we'll update the bylaws accordingly before the mayor and the clerk execute the documents.
Excellent. So what I'm going to, let me refer back to my formal document here. Hold on. As the clerk informs me, there are no further speakers. This formal public meeting is concluded, and the application is now open to council for a motion and debate. And I'm going to suggest that the motion as printed with the minor changes as mentioned or as discussed with planning. And I don't think we have to read Bill 73 on this one, do we? Or is it for the next? Yeah. Oh, okay. Okay, yeah. Moved by Councillor Henry, second by Councillor Bonagor. Bill 73, please go ahead.
Whereas Council has considered all written and oral submissions from the public and stakeholders, and whereas Council has considered the professional opinions of planning staff, therefore be it resolved, 1, that Council approve report IPPW 2022-036, 2, that Council adopt official plan amendment number 34, OPA 34, housekeeping amendments to the official plan as set out in Schedule A to IPPW 2022-036, 3, that Council requests that the Regional Municipality of Waterloo approve official plan amendment number 34, OPA 34. 4, that Council approves zoning bylaw amendment Z-22-01, housekeeping and general amendments to the zoning bylaw 2018-050, as set out in Schedule B to IPPW 2022-036. That Council approve. Number 5, that Council approve report IPPW 2022-036.1. 6, that Council approves zoning bylaw amendment Z-22-01, housekeeping and general amendments to zoning bylaw 2018-050 as set out in Schedule B to IPPW 2022-036 and updated in Schedule A of IPPW 2022-036.1. And I'd add 7, and that the Council further approve the minor amendments that were raised today be incorporated into the bylaw, and then we can get to voting.
Excellent. Bill 73 sometimes almost gets in our way. I'll do the voting beginning with Ward 1, please.
Councillor Hanmer in favor.
Councillor Bodley in favor.
Councillor Veith in favor.
Councillor Freeman in favor.
Councillor Bassick in favor.
Councillor Henry in favor.
Councillor Bonagor in favor.
And the mayor's in favor too. And in case I didn't mention it, Councillor Bonagor was seconder of that motion. So thank you very much, Tristan and Dominic. And everybody loves solar. So we're going to push through here. If you'd like to speak at this planning meeting, please call the clerk's office, 519-747-8705. This is a formal public meeting to consider extension of the Support Our Local Economic Recovery Solar, SOLER initiative. Any persons who want further notice of the application should contact planner Joel Cotter at 519-747-8543 or at joel.cotter waterloo.ca. Will the clerk please advise council of the method used to give notice of the meeting and the dates notice was given?
Notice was advertised in the Waterloo Chronicle on June 9th, 2022. No informal public meeting was held.
Certainly, solar is one of the most joyous planning matters of our council term during the pandemic. I can't imagine that Mr. Cotter has a presentation, and I can't imagine anything more to know. I see no registered delegations. The clerk has informed me. Who's called in? No one. As the clerk informs me, there are no further speakers. This formal public meeting is concluded, and the application is now open to a motion and debate. With that closed, I'll look to see that Councillor Vasic has moved it, Councillor Bodley has seconded it, and I'll just look to see if somebody has Bill 73 in wording in front of them. Councillor Vasic? Oh, sorry, Councillor Bonagor. I missed that. Please go ahead with your comment.
Thank you, through you, Major Jaworski. There's a comment hiding in the weeds. I just wanted to say thanks to staff. Given the ups and downs of the last couple of years, I think it'll certainly help the businesses in the core to have hopefully a little bit of time to kind of hopefully move out of this. But I also am very thankful to see the suggestion that the program will be reviewed, because I think it's really worth investigating whether we want something like this on a more permanent basis than one-by-one extensions of the program. So so thank you. I just wanted to say thanks to staff. I think it's a good direction.
Excellent. Thank you, Councillor Bonagor. And I'll look to see if Councillor Vasic has the Bill 73 wording in front of her.
I do.
Awesome.
Okay.
Oh, you both can read it.
We can, yeah. Oh, geez. I didn't realize there was a Bill 73 when I moved. It's true. Whereas Council has considered all written and oral submissions from the public and stakeholders, and whereas Council has considered the professional opinions of planning staff, therefore be it resolved that Council approve report IPPW 2022-044 2, that Council support the extension of the solar initiative until December 31st, 2023, that Council approve the extension of temporary use zoning bylaw 2020-049 as amended solar initiative pursuant to Section 39 of the Planning Act as set forth in IPPW 2022-044. 4, that Council pass the following motion: that the Province of Ontario continue to provide flexibility and support to businesses impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic by directing the AGCO Registrar to extend, pursuant to Section 153 of Regulation 746 made under the Liquor Licensing Control Act 2019, the policy to allow for the temporary physical extension of premises, i.e. patios, until January 1st, 2024, provided that the municipality supports the patio/patio expansion and all other applicable laws are met. And I vote in favor.
Let's keep going around the table on that one. Go ahead.
Councillor Henry in favor.
Councillor Henry has raised a point of order.
Yeah, sorry, I wasn't looking at it.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor. Just wanted a correction on the what Councillor Vasic read. I thought the extension was, I would love to see the extension to December 31st, 2024, but I think it is only till 2023.
That is correct.
Thank you.
Oh, it was red. I'm sorry. I was doing something else. 2023 it is. Correct. Point of order. Let's continue the voting wherever we left off.
In Ward 7, and Councillor Bonagor is in favour.
Councillor Hanmer in favour.
Councillor Bodley in favour.
Councillor Veith in favour.
Councillor Freeman in favour.
And Mayor Jaworski's in favor. That carries. Thank you all very much. We made it to like 5:01, which is like perfect. And with that, we will stand in recess until tonight, dialing in at 6:15ish. So we'll see you all tonight. Thank you.
Bye.